with extraordinary magnificence and royal festivals. The days of feasting being over, and King Armanos understanding that the princess, whom he still took for Prince Camaralzaman, talked of going aboard again to proceed on her voyage, he was so charmed with the air and qualities of such an accomplished prince, as he took her, that he watched his opportunity when she was alone, and spoke in the following manner: "You see, Prince, that I am old, and cannot hope to live long. It is my great trouble that I have not a son to whom I may leave my crown. Heaven has only blessed me with one daughter, who cannot desire to be more happy than a prince of your virtues can make her, whose merit is equal with your birth. Instead of going home, stay, and take her from my hand. With her I will give you my kingdom, and retreat myself to a quiet life, free from the business and cares of the world, having long enough had the weight of the crown upon me, and nothing could be a greater pleasure in my retirement, than to consider what a worthy successor sits in my throne, and rules my happy people." The king of the Isle of Eban's generous offer to bestow his only daughter in marriage on the Princess Badora, who could not accept of it because she was a woman, gave her unexpected trouble, and she could not presently think of an expedient to extricate herself out of it. She thought it would not become a princess of her rank to deceive the king, and to own that she was not Prince Camaralzaman, but his wife, when she had assured him she was he himself, whose part she had hitherto acted so well that her sex was not in the least suspected. She was also afraid to refuse him, seeing him so much bent upon the conclusion of the marriage, that there was reason to apprehend his kindness would turn to aversion and hatred, if the honor he offered her was rejected, and that he might attempt something even against her life. Besides, she was not sure of finding Prince Camaralzaman in the court of King Shahzaman, his father. These considerations, added to the prospect of obtaining a kingdom for the prince her husband, in case she found him again, made her resolve to do what King Armanos would have her, to marry his daughter. So, after having stood silent some minutes, she, with blushes which the king took for a sign of modesty, answered, "Sir, I am infinitely obliged to your majesty for your good opinion, for the honor you do me, and the great favor you offer, which I cannot pretend to merit, and dare not refuse. But, sir," continued she, "I cannot accept of this alliance, on any other condition, than that your majesty will assist me with your counsel, and that I do nothing without first having your approbation." The marriage treaty being thus concluded and agreed on, the ceremony was put off till next day. In the meantime the princess Badora gave notice to her officers, who still took her for Prince Camaralzaman, what she was about to do, that they might not be surprised at it, assuring them that the Princess Badora consented to it. She talked also to her women, and charged them to keep the secret she had entrusted them with, as they valued their lives. The king of the Isle of Ebene rejoiced that he had got a son-in-law so much to his satisfaction. The next morning he summoned his council, and acquainted them with his design of marrying his daughter to Prince Camaralzaman, whom he introduced to them, and made him sit down by them, taking the Princess Badora for him, told them he resigned the crown to him, and required them to obey and swear fealty to him. Having said this, he descended from his throne, and the Princess Badora, by his order, mounted it. When she was placed, the lords of the court did her homage, and took an oath of allegiance. As soon as the council broke up, the new king was proclaimed through the city. Several days of rejoicing were appointed, and couriers dispatched all over the kingdom to see the same ceremonies observed with the like demonstrations of joy. At night there was an extraordinary feasting at the palace royal. And the Princess Hayatalnefous footnote, this is an Arabic word which signifies life and soul, dressed like a royal bride, was led to the Princess Badoura, whom everybody took for a man. The wedding was solemnized with the utmost splendor, and the rites being performed, they were put to bed. In the morning, the Princess Badoura went to receive the compliments of the nobility in a hail of audience, where they congratulated her on her marriage and accession to the throne. In the meanwhile, King Armanos and the Queen went to the apartment of the new Queen, their daughter, and asked how she had spent the night. Instead of answering them, she held down her head, and by her looks they perceived that she was not contented. King Armanos, to comfort the Princess Hayatalnefous, bid her not be troubled, as Prince Camaralzaman might be in haste to go to his father's court, and had not stopped at the Isle of Abene, if it had not been in his way thither. Though we have engaged him to stay by arguments with which he ought to be well satisfied, yet it is probable he grieves to be all at once deprived of the hopes of seeing either his father or any of his family. You must wait till those first emotions of tenderness are over, and his filial love wears off by degrees. He will then carry himself towards you as a good husband ought. The Princess Badoura, under the name and character of Prince Camaralzaman, not only received the congratulatory addresses of the courtiers and the nobility of the kingdom who were in and about the city, but reviewed the regular troops of her household, and entered on the administration of affairs as king with so much majesty and judgment as gained her the general applause of all who were witnesses of her conduct. It was evening before she returned to Queen Hayatalnefous's apartment, and perceived, by the reception she met with, that the bride was not at all pleased with the wedding night. She endeavored to make her easy by a long discourse, in which she employed all the wit she had, and that was as much as any woman was mistress of, to persuade her she loved her entirely. She then gave her time to go to bed, and while she undressed herself she went to her devotions, but her prayers were so long, that Queen Hayatalnefous was asleep before they were ended. She then gave over, and lay down softly by the new queen, without waking her, and was as much afflicted at being obliged to act a part which did not belong to her, as in the loss of her dear Camaralzaman, for whom she ceased not to sigh. She rose as soon as it was day, before Hayatalnefous was awake, and, dressed in her royal robes, as king, went to council. King Armanos, as he did the day before, came early to visit the queen his daughter, whom he found in sighs and tears. He wanted no more to be informed of the cause of her trouble. He began to resent the contempt, as he thought, which was put upon his daughter, and could not imagine the reason of it. Daughter, said he, have patience for another night. I raised your husband to the throne, and can pull him down again. Depend upon it, I will drive him thence with shame, unless he gives you the satisfaction that he ought to do. His usage of you has provoked me so much, I Cannot tell to what my resentment may transport me, the affront is as much to me as to you. It was late again before the Princess Badoura came to Queen Hayatalnefous. She talked to her as she had done the night before, and in the same manner went to her devotions, desiring the queen to go to bed. But Hayatalnefous would not be so served. She held her back, and obliged her to sit down again. What, said she, do you think to deal by me this night as you have done the two last? Pray tell me, what can you dislike in a princess of my youth and beauty, who not only loves but adores you, and thinks herself the happiest of all princesses in having so amiable a prince for her husband? Any body but me would revenge the slight, or rather the unpardonable affront that you have put upon me, and abandon you to your evil destiny. However, though I did not love you as well as I do, yet, out of pure good nature and humanity, which make me pity the misfortunes of persons for whom I am no ways concerned, I could not forbear telling you that the king my father is enraged against you for your carriage towards me, and will tomorrow exert his fury in a manner I tremble to think of. If you still use me as you have hitherto done, do not therefore throw into a despair a princess, who, notwithstanding your ill usage, cannot help loving you. This discourse embarrassed the Princess Badoura more than any thing she had yet met with. She did not doubt the truth of what Hayatalnefous had said. King Armanos's coldness the day before had given her but too much reason to see that he was highly dissatisfied with her. The only way to justify her conduct was to communicate her sex to the Princess Hayatalnefous. She had foreseen she should be under a necessity of discovering it to her, yet, now she was about to make such a declaration, was afraid how she would receive it, but, considering that if Camaralzaman was alive, he must necessarily touch at the Isle of Abene in his way to King Shahzaman his father's kingdom, that she ought to preserve herself for his sake, and as it was impossible to do it, if she did not let the Princess Hayatalnefous know who and what she was, she resolved to venture and try to get off that way. The Princess Badoura stood as one struck dumb, and Hayatalnefous, being impatient to hear what she could say, was about to speak to her again, when she stopped her by these words, lovely and too charming princess. I own I have been in the wrong, and I condemn myself for it, but I hope you will pardon me, and keep the secret I am going to reveal to you for my justification. She then opened her bosom, and, showing her naked breasts, proceeded thus, see, princess, if a woman, and a princess like yourself, does not deserve to be forgiven, I believe you will be so good at least, when you know my story, and the terrible affliction that forced me to act the part you see. The Princess Badoura, having discovered herself entirely to the Princess of the Isle of Abene, again prayed her to keep the secret, and to accept her as a husband till Prince Camaralzaman's arrival, which she hoped would be in a little time. Princess, replied Hayatalnefous, your fortune is indeed strange. That a marriage, so unhappy as yours was, should be rendered unhappy by so unaccountable an accident, your love being reciprocal, and full of wonders. Pray heaven you may again meet with your husband as soon as you desire. And be assured I will keep the secret till he arrives. It will be the greatest pleasure to me in the world to be the only person in the vast kingdom of The Isle of Abene, who knows what and who you are, while you continue to govern the people as happily as you have begun. I only ask to be your friend, nothing could be more to my satisfaction. The two princesses tenderly embraced each other, and, after 1,000 vows of mutual friendship, lay down to rest. According to the custom of the country, the token of the consummation of the marriage was to be produced and shown publicly. The two princesses concerted a method to get over that difficulty. Queen Hyatalnephaus's women, though cunning and quick-sighted, were next morning deceived themselves, and King Armenos, his queen, and the whole court completely beguiled. From this time the Princess Badora grew more and more in King Armenos's esteem and affection, governing the kingdom to his and his people's content, peaceably and prosperously. While these things were transacting in the court of the Isle of Abene, Prince Camaralzaman stayed in the city of idolaters with the gardener, who had offered his house for a retreat till the ship should sail for that island. One morning, when the prince was up early, and, as he used to do, was preparing to work in the garden, the gardener prevented him, saying, "This day is a great festival among the idolaters, and because they abstain from work themselves, spending their time in abominable mysteries and public rejoicings, they will not let Mussulman work, who, to gain their favor, generally assist at their shows, which are worth seeing, wherefore have nothing to do. Today, I leave you here, and the time approaching in which the ship uses to sail for the Isle of Abene, I will go to some of my friends, and know when it will depart, and secure you a passage in it." The gardener put on his best clothes, and went to the feast. When Prince Camaralzaman was alone, instead of going to take part in the public joy of the city, the solitude he was in brought to his mind, with more violence, the loss of his dear princess. He walked through the garden sighing and groaning, till the noise which two birds made on a neighboring tree tempted him to lift up his head, and stop to see what was the matter. Camaralzaman was astonished at seeing these two birds fighting with their beaks, and that in a very little while one of them fell down dead at the root of a tree. The bird that was victorious took wing again, and flew away. In an instant, two other large birds, that had seen the fight at a distance, came from the other side of the garden, and pitched on the ground, one at the feet, and the other at the head of the dead bird. They looked upon it some time, shaking their heads, as if they were grieved at the death of their departed friend, after which, digging a grave with their talons, they interred the defunct. When they filled up the grave with the earth which they had turned up to make it, they flew away, and returned in a few minutes, bringing with them the bird that had committed the murder, the one holding one of its wings in its beak, and the other one of its legs, the criminal all the while crying out in a doleful manner, and struggling to escape. They carried it to the grave of the bird which it had lately sacrificed to its rage, and there they made a sacrifice of it to the manes of the dead bird. And, striking it often with their beaks, at last they killed the murderer. They then opened its belly, tore out its entrails, left its body on the place unburied, and flew away. Camaralzaman remained in great astonishment all the time he stood beholding this sight. He drew near the tree where this scene had been acted, and, casting his eyes on the scattered entrails of the bird that was last killed, he observed something red hanging Out of its body, he took it up, and found it was his beloved Princess Badora's talisman, which had cost him so much pains and sorrow, and so many sighs, since the bird snatched it out of his hand. Ah, cruel! Said he to himself, still looking on the bird. Thou hadst delight in mischief, so I have the less reason to complain of what thou didst to me. It is impossible to express Prince Camaralzaman's joy. Dear Princess, continued he to himself, this happy minute, which restores a treasure that is so precious to thee, is, without doubt, a presage of our meeting again, and perhaps sooner than I think of. Thank Heaven, who sent me this good fortune, and gives me hopes of the greatest felicity that my heart can desire. Saying this, he kissed the talisman, wrapped it up in a riband, and tied it carefully about his arm. Till now he had been almost a stranger to rest, his troubles always keeping him awake, but the next night he slept soundly. He rose somewhat later next morning than he used to do, put on his working clothes, and went to the gardener for orders what he should go about. The good man bid him root up an old tree that stood in a place to which he directed him, and was decaying. Camaralzaman took an axe, and began his work cutting off a branch at the root. He found that his axe struck against something which resisted the blow, and made a noise. He turned up the earth, and discovered a broad plate of brass, under which was a staircase of 10 steps. He went down, and at the bottom observed a cave of above 6 yards square, with 50 brass urns placed in order around it, each urn having a cover. He opened them all, one after another, and there was not one of them which was not full of gold dust. He came out of the cave rejoicing that he had found such a vast treasure. He replaced the brass plate on the staircase, and next rooted up the tree, previous to the gardener's coming to see what he had done. The gardener had learned the day before that the ship which was bound for the Isle of Abene would sail in a few days, though the certain time was not fixed. His friend promised to inform him the precise day, if he called on him tomorrow or the day after, and while Camaralzaman was rooting up the tree, he went to have his answer. He returned with a joyful countenance, by which the prince guessed he brought him good news. Son, said the old man. So he always called him on account of the difference between their ages. Be joyful, prepare to embark in 3 days, the ship will then certainly sail. I have taken a passage for you, and settled the price with the captain. In the condition I am at present, replied Camaralzaman, you could not bring me more agreeable news, and in return I have also tidings that will be as welcome to you. Come along with me, and you shall see what good fortune heaven has in store for you. The prince led the gardener to the place where he had rooted up the tree, showed him the way into the cave, and, when there, let him see what a treasure he had discovered, thanking Providence for rewarding his virtue, and the pains he had been at for so many years. How, replied the gardener, do you imagine I will take these riches as mine which you found out? The property of them is yours, I have no right to them. For 80 years, so long my father has been dead, I have done nothing but dig in this garden, and could not discover this treasure, which is a sign that it was destined to you by fate, or heaven had revealed it to me. It agrees with your quality as a prince, and suits your age, too. better than mine. I am old, and have one foot in the grave, and cannot tell what to do with so much wealth. Providence has bestowed it upon you at a time when you are returning to that country which will one day be your own, where you may make a good use of it for the advantage of yourself, and the people over whom you are to reign. Prince Camaralzaman would not be outdone in generosity by the gardener. They had a long dispute who should refuse it, for neither of them would have it from the other. At last the prince solemnly protested that he would have none of it, unless the gardener would divide it with him, and take half. The good man consented to please the prince, so they parted it between them, which amounted to 25 urns each. Having divided it, "Son," said the gardener to the prince, "it is not enough that you have got this treasure, we must now contrive to carry it so privately on board a ship, that nobody may know anything of the matter, otherwise you will run the risk of losing it. There are no olives in the Isle of Abene, and those which are exported hence are a good commodity there. You know I have plenty of them. Take what you will, fill 50 pots, half with the gold dust, and half with olives, which being a common merchandise from this city to that island, none will mistrust that there is anything but olives in the pots." The counsel was good, and Camaralzaman followed it. The rest of the day was taken up by him and the old man in packing up the gold and the olives in the 50 pots, and the prince, fearing the talisman should come by any ill accident again, carefully put it up in one of the pots, distinguishing it from the others by a particular mark. Footnote: this incident is also much the same with one in the romance of Peter of Provence and the fair Maguelona. When they were all ready to be shipped, the prince retired into the gardener's hut with him, and discoursing together, related the battles of the birds, with the circumstance of the adventure in which he had found the Princess Badora's talisman. The gardener was equally surprised and joyful to hear it, knowing what trouble the prince had been at for its loss. Whether the old gardener was quite worn out with age, or had spent himself too much that day, he had a very bad night's rest. He grew worse next day, and on the third day, when the prince was to embark, was so bad, that it was evident he was near the point of death. As soon as day began to dawn, the captain of the ship came in person, with several seamen to the gardener's, and knocking at the garden door, Camaralzaman opened it. They asked him where the passenger was who was to go with them. The prince answered, "I am he, the gardener, who agreed with you for my passage, is extremely ill, and cannot be spoken with. Come in, and let your men carry these pots of olives, and a few other things, on board for me. I will only take leave of the gardener, and then follow you to the water side." The seamen took up the pots and the baggage, and the captain desired the prince to make haste. The wind being fair, they stayed for nothing but him. When the captain and his men were gone, Camaralzaman went to the gardener to take leave of him, and thank him for all his good offices, but he found him in the agonies of death, and had scarcely time to bid him rehearse the articles of his faith, which all good Mussulmen do before they die. The gardener made the best efforts he could towards it, and expired in his presence. The prince, being obliged to hasten his departure, was at a loss what to do. He was afraid he should lose his voyage if he stayed, and was very unwilling to leave his dead benefactor without paying the last duties of a friend, according to their law. He washed him, buried him in his own garden, for the Mohammedans had no churchyard in the city of the idolaters, where they were only tolerated winking face, and though he did it as fast as he could, having nobody to assist him, it was almost night before he had put him in the ground. As soon as he had done so, he ran to the water side, carrying with him the key of the garden, designing, if he had time, to give it to the landlord, otherwise to deposit it in some trusty person's hand before witnesses, that he might have it after he was gone. When he came to the port, he was told that the ship had sailed several hours before, and was already out of sight. It stayed 3 hours for him, but, the wind being fair, the captain durst not wait longer. It is easy to imagine that Prince Camaralzaman was exceedingly concerned on being forced to stay in that country a year longer, where he neither had, nor was willing to have, any acquaintance. It was a sad thing to reflect how long he had to wait for the lost opportunity, but what gave him the greatest affliction was his missing the Princess Badora's talisman, which he now concluded to be entirely lost. The only course that was left for him was to return to the garden from whence he came, to rent it of the landlord, and to go on with his gardening, that he might deplore his misery and misfortunes by himself. He hired a boy to help him to do some part of the drudgery, and, that he might not lose the other half of the treasure, which came to him by the death of the gardener, who died without heirs, he put the gold dust in 50 other pots of olives, to be ready against the time of the ship's return, and making the same voyage. While Prince Camaralzaman began another year of labor, sorrow, and impatience, the ship, having a fair wind, sailed to the Isle of Abene, where in due time she arrived at the capital city. The palace royal being by the seaside, the new king, or rather, the Princess Badora, espying the ship as she was entering the port, asked what vessel it was. She was answered, that it came from the city of the idolaters, from whence it used to come every year about that time, and was generally richly laden. The princess, who always had Prince Camaralzaman in her mind, amidst the glories of her palace and power, imagined that the prince might be on board, on which thought, she resolved, since it might be so, to go on board the ship and meet him, not to discover herself to him, for she questioned whether he would know her again, but to observe him, and take proper measures for their making themselves mutually known. Her pretense was, to see what merchandise was aboard, to have the first sight of the goods, and to choose the most valuable for herself. She commanded a horse to be brought, which she mounted, and rode to the port, accompanied by several officers, who were in waiting at that time, and arrived at the port just as the captain came ashore. She ordered him to be brought before her, and asked whence he came, how long he had been on his voyages, and what good or bad fortune he had met with, if he had no stranger of quality on board, and with what his ship was loaded. The captain gave a satisfactory answer to all her demands, and, as to passengers, assured her there were none but merchants in his ship, who came every year, and brought rich stuffs from several parts of the world to trade with, calicoes stained or unstained, diamonds, musk, ambergris, camphire, civet, spices, drugs, and olives. The Princess Badora loved olives extremely. When she heard the Captain, speak of them, land them, said she, I will take them off your hands. As to the other goods, let the merchants bring them to me, and let me see them before they are disposed of, or show them to any one. The captain, taking her for the king of the Isle of Abene, replied, Sir, there are 50 great pots of olives, but they belong to a merchant whom I was forced to leave behind. I gave him notice that I stayed for him, but he not coming, and the wind presenting, I was afraid of losing it, and so set sail. The princess answered, It is no matter, bring them ashore, we will drive a bargain for them. However, the captain sent his boat to the ship and in a little time returned with the pots of olives. The princess demanded how much the 50 pots might be worth in the Isle of Abene. Sir, said the captain, the merchant is very poor, and your majesty will not pay too dear if you give him 1,000 pieces of silver. To satisfy him, replied the princess, and because you tell me he is poor, I will order you 1,000 pieces of gold for him. Which do you take care to give him? The money was accordingly paid, and the pots carried to the palace. Night drawing on, the princess withdrew into the inner palace, and went to the Princess Hyatalnefous' apartment, ordering the olives to be brought thither. She opened one, to let the Princess Hyatalnefous taste them, and to taste them herself. Great was her astonishment when she found the olives were mingled with gold dust. What can this mean? Said she, it is wonderful beyond comprehension. Her curiosity increasing by so extraordinary an adventure, she ordered Hyatalnefous' women to open and empty all the pots in her presence, and her wonder was still greater when she saw that the olives in all of them were mixed with gold dust, but when she saw her talisman drop out of that in which the prince had put it, she was so surprised that she swooned away. The Princess Hyatalnefous and her women brought the Princess Badora to life again by throwing cold water in her face. When her senses were restored, she took the talisman, and kissed it again and again, but not willing that the Princess Hyatalnefous' women should hear what passed, and it growing late, she dismissed them. Princess, said she to Hyatalnefous, as soon as they were gone, you, who have heard my story, must know that it was at the sight of the talisman that I swooned. This is the thing which was the fatal cause of my losing my dear husband, Prince Camaralzaman. But, as it caused our separation, so I foresee it will be the means of our sudden meeting. Next day, as soon as it was light, she sent for the captain of the ship, and, when he came, spoke to him thus, I want to know something more of the merchant to whom the olives belong which I bought of you yesterday. I think you told me you left him behind in the city of the idolaters. Can you tell me what he does there? Yes, sir, replied the captain, I can speak on my own knowledge, and assure your majesty what I say is truth. I agreed for his passage with a gardener, a very old man, who told me I should find him in his garden, where he worked under him. He showed me the place, and I went thither to call him, where I found what the gardener had said to be true, and for that reason I told your majesty he was poor. I spoke to him myself, and cannot be mistaken. If what you say be true, replied the Princess Badora, you must set sail this very day for the city of idolaters, and bring that gardener's man, who is my debtor, otherwise I will not only confiscate all the goods belonging to yourself and the merchants You have brought with you, but your and their lives shall answer for your refusal. I have ordered my seal to be put on the warehouses which contain your merchandise, nor shall it be taken off till that man is brought here. This is all I have to say, go and do as I command you. The captain could make no reply to this order, though to obey it would be a great loss to him and his merchants. He acquainted them with it, and they all very wisely considering that to lose their goods and their lives would be a much greater, hastened him away as fast as they could. They set all hands to work to load the ship with provisions and fresh water for the voyage back, and were so diligent, that she was ready to sail before night. Accordingly, the captain weighed anchor, and made for the city of the idolaters, where he arrived in a short time, the wind and weather favoring him during the whole of the voyage. When he was as near the city as he thought convenient, he would not cast anchor, but let the ship ride offshore, and, going into his boat, with as many hands as he wanted, he landed a little way off the port, whence he went directly to Camaralzaman's garden. Though it was about midnight when he arrived there, the prince was not asleep. His separation from the fair princess of China, his wife, afflicted him in the usual manner, and he lay awake, bemoaning his ill fortune. He cursed the day in which his curiosity tempted him to touch the fatal girdle. Thus did he pass those hours which are devoted to rest, and was in these mournful meditations when he heard somebody knock at the garden door. He ran hastily to open it, half dressed as he was, and had no sooner done it than the captain and his seamen took hold of him, and carried him by force to the boat, and so on shipboard, when they set sail immediately, and made the best of their way to the Isle of Abene. Hitherto Camaralzaman, the captain, and his men, had not said a word to each other. At last the prince broke silence, and asked the captain, whom he knew again, why they had taken him away by force. The captain, in his turn, demanded of the prince whether he was not a debtor to the king of Abene. I, the king of Eban's debtor, replied Camaralzaman, in amazement. I do not know him. I never had anything to do with him in my life, and never set foot in his kingdom. The captain answered, you should know that better than me. You will soon talk to him yourself. Till then, stay here and have patience. The captain was not long on his voyage back to the Isle of Abene. Though it was night when he cast anchor in the port, he landed immediately, and, taking Prince Camaralzaman with him, hastened to the palace, where he demanded to be introduced to the king. The Princess Badora was withdrawn into the inner palace. However, as soon as she heard of the captain's return, and Camaralzaman's arrival, she came forth to speak to him. As soon as she cast her eyes on the prince, she knew the man for whom so many tears had been shed, though he was still in his gardener's habit. As for the prince, who trembled in the presence of a king, as he thought her, to whom he was to answer for an imaginary debt, it did not enter his thoughts that the person, whom he so earnestly desired to see, stood before him. If the princess had followed the dictates of her inclination, she would have run to him, and, by embracing, discovered herself, but she put on herself a constraint, believing that it was for both their interests she should act the part of a king a little longer. Before making herself known, she contented herself for the present to put him into the hands of an officer who was then in waiting, charging him to take care of him, and use him well, till next day. When the Princess Badora had provided for Prince Camaralaman's entertainment, she turned to the captain, whom she was now to gratify for the important service he had done. She commanded another officer to go immediately and take the seal off the warehouse where the goods belonging to him and the merchants were deposited, whom she discharged. She also gave the master of the vessel a jewel worth much more than the expense he had been at in both his voyages. She bade him, besides, keep the 1,000 pieces of gold he had got for the pots of olives, telling him she would make up the account with the merchant he had brought with him. This done, she retired to the Princess of the Isle of Ebon's apartment, to whom she communicated her joy, praying her still to keep the secret. She told her how she intended to manage their discovering themselves to each other, and to the kingdom, adding that so vast was the distance between a gardener and a great prince, as he was, that it might be dangerous to raise him at once from the lowest condition of the people to the highest degree, though it was but justice it should be done. The princess of the Isle of Ebene was so far from betraying her, that she rejoiced, and entered into the design, assuring her she would contribute to it all that lay in her power, and do whatever she would desire to serve them. Next morning the Princess of China ordered Prince Camaralzaman to be conducted to the royal baths, and apparelled in the robes of an emir or governor of a province. She then went to the council with the name, habit, and authority, of King of the island of Ebene. She commanded Camaralzaman to be introduced, and his fine mien and majestic air drew upon him the eyes of all the lords who were present. The Princess Badora was charmed to see him again as lovely as she had often seen him, and that pleasure inspired her to speak the more warmly in his praise. When she addressed herself to the council, having ordered the prince to take his seat among the emirs, she spoke to them thus: My lords, Camaralzaman, the man whom I have advanced to the same dignity with yourselves, is not unworthy of the honor that is done him. I have known enough of him in my travels to answer for him, and I can assure you he will make his merit known to all of you, as well by his valor, as by 1,000 other shining qualities which distinguish him from the rest of mankind. Camaralzaman was extremely amazed to hear the king of the Isle of Ebene, whom he was far from taking for a woman, much less for his dear princess, name him, and declare that he knew him, who, as he thought, was certain he had never seen him before. He was much more surprised to hear himself praised so excessively. However, those eulogiums, excessive as they were, did not confound him. Though they came from the mouth of a king, he received them with modesty as showed that he deserved them, and did not grow vain upon it. He portraited himself before the throne of the king, and rising again, Sir, said he, I want words to express my gratitude to your majesty for the honor you have done me. I shall do all that lies in my power to render myself worthy of your royal favor. From the council board the prince was conducted to a palace which the Princess Badora ordered to be fitted up for him, where he found officers and domestics ready to receive and obey his commands, a stable full of fine horses, and everything suitable to the quality of an emir. When he was in his closet, the steward of his household brought a chest full of gold for his expenses. The less he conceived how it came about that he met with so much good fortune, the more he wondered at it, never once imagining it was owing to the Princess of China. 2 or 3 days after, the Princess Badoura made him Lord Treasurer, which office was then vacant, that he might be nearer her person. He behaved himself in this new charge with much integrity, and was so obliging to everybody, that he not only gained the friendship of the great, but also the affections of the people, by his uprightness and bounty. Camaralzaman, being the reigning favorite of the king of the Isle of Abene, and in the esteem of all his subjects, would have been the happiest man in the world, if he had had his princess with him. In the midst of his good fortune he never ceased lamenting her, and grieved that he could hear no tidings of her, especially in a country which she must necessarily have passed in her way to his father's court, and have arrived long before. If she had not met with some ill accident by the way, he would have doubted something, had the Princess Badoura still gone by the name of Camaralzaman, which she took with his habit, but, on her accession to the throne, she changed it to that of Armanos, in honor of the old king her father-in-law. There were very few courtiers who knew that she had ever been called Camaralzaman, which she assumed when she arrived at the court of the Isle of Abene, nor had Camaralzaman so much acquaintance with any of them as yet to inform himself further of her history. The princess, fearing he might do it in time, and desirous he should owe the discovery to herself only, resolved to put an end to their mutual torments, for she had observed that, as often as she discoursed about the affairs of his office, he fetched such deep sighs as could be applied to nobody but her. She herself lived in such constraint, that she could endure it no longer. Add to this the friendship of the emirs and courtiers, and the zeal and affection of the people, in a word, everything contributed to her putting the crown of the Isle of Abene on his head without any obstacle. The Princess Badoura consulted the Princess Hayatalnefous in this, as she had done in the other parts of the adventure, and both agreeing to have it done, she one day took Prince Camaralzaman aside, saying, "I must talk with you about an affair, Camaralzaman, in which I want your advice. It will not be so proper to do it by daylight, for our discourse may be long, and I would not be observed. Come hither in the evening, do not let us wait for you, I will take care to provide you a bed." Camaralzaman came punctually to the palace at the hour appointed by the princess. She took him into the inner apartment, and having told the chief eunuch, who prepared to follow her, that she had no occasion for his service, but only keep the door shut, she carried him into a private apartment adjoining to the Princess Hayatalnefous, where she used to lie. When she entered the chamber, where was a bed, she shut the door, and, taking the talisman out of her pocket, gave it to Camaralzaman, saying, "It is not long since an astrologer presented me with this talisman, you being skillful in all things. Pray tell me for what it is good." Camaralzaman took the talisman, and drew near a lamp to view it. As soon as he knew it to be the princess's, he was transported with pleasure, and she was no less pleased to see it. "Sir," said the prince, "your majesty asked me what this talisman is good for." "Oh, king! It is only good to kill me with grief and despair, if I do not suddenly find the most charming and lovely princess in the world, to whom it belongs, whose loss I was the occasion of, and of a strange adventure to me, the very recital of which will move your majesty to pity such an unfortunate husband and lover, if you have patience to hear it. You shall tell me that another time, replied the princess. I am very glad I know something of it already. Stay here a little, and I will return to you in a moment. At these words she went into her closet, put off her royal turban, and in a few minutes dressed herself like a woman, and, having the girdle round her which she had on the day of their separation, she entered the chamber. Prince Camaralzaman immediately knew his dear princess. He ran to her, and tenderly embraced her, crying out, "Ah! How much am I obliged to the king, who has so agreeably surprised me." "Do not expect to see the king any more," replied the princess, with tears in her eyes. "Let us sit down, and I will explain the enigma." They sat down, and the princess told the prince her resolution. When in the field where they encamped the last time they were together, as soon as she perceived, she waited for him to know purpose, how she went through with it till she arrived at the Isle of Abene, where she had been obliged to marry the princess Hyatalnefous, and accept of the crown, which King Armanos offered as one of the conditions of the marriage. How the princess, whose merit she highly extolled, took her declaration of her sex, how she found the talisman in the pots of olives mingled with the gold dust, and that her finding it was the cause of her sending for him to the city of the idolaters. When she had finished the relation of her adventure, she obliged the prince to tell his. He informed her how the talisman occasioned their separation, and the rest of the story relating to him, as already told. They then bemoaned one another's ill fortune, and rejoiced in their good. He complained of her with the kindest expressions love could invent, chiding her tenderly for making him languish so long without her, and she excused herself with the reasons already related. After which, it growing late, they went to bed. The Princess Badora and Prince Camaralzaman rose next morning as soon as it was light, but the princess would no more put on her royal robes as king. She dressed herself in her natural dress, that of a woman, and then sent the chief eunuch to King Armanos, her father-in-law, to desire he would take the trouble to come to her apartment. When the king entered the chamber, he was amazed to see a lady there who was unknown to him, and the Lord Treasurer with her, too, whom it was not permitted to come within the inner palace, nor to any of the lords of the court. He sat down, and asked where the king was. The princess answered, "Yesterday I was king, sir, but today I am only princess of China, wife to Prince Camaralzaman, the true son of King Shahzaman. If your majesty will have patience to hear our histories, I hope you will not condemn me for putting an innocent deceit upon you." The king bade her go on, and heard her discourse from beginning to end, with astonishment. The princess, finishing, said to him, "Sir, though our religion does not suffer men to have more wives than one, without some sort of scandal, and we women do not easily comply with the custom men have introduced to have several, yet if your majesty will consent to give your daughter, the Princess Hyatalnefous, in marriage to the Prince Camaralzaman, I will with all my heart yield up to her the rank and quality of queen which of right belongs to her, and content myself with the second place. If this precedence were not her due, I would, however, give it her, being obliged to her for keeping the secret so faithfully. If your majesty approves of it, I am sure she will, and will pass my word that she will obey you. With joy. King Armanos listened to the princess with admiration, and when she had done, turned about to Prince Camaralzaman, saying, Son, since the Princess Badora, your wife, whom I have all along thought to be my son-in-law through a deceit of which I do not complain, assures me that she will divide your bed with my daughter, I have nothing more to do but to know if you are willing to marry her, and accept of the crown, which the Princess Badora should deservedly wear as long as she lived, if she did not quit it out of love to you. Sir, replied Prince Camaralzaman, though I desired nothing so earnestly as to see my father, yet the obligations I have to your majesty and the Princess Hayatalnefous are so weighty, that I cannot deny you anything in my power. Camaralzaman was proclaimed king, and married the same day with all possible demonstrations of joy, he being very well pleased with the Princess Hayatalnefous's beauty and love for him. The two queens lived together afterwards as friendly as they had done before, both being contented with King Camaralzaman's equal carriage towards them, and they were alternately taken to his bed. Next year each brought him a son, and the births of the two princes were celebrated with extraordinary feastings. The first, whom the Princess Badora was delivered of King Camaralzaman, named Amgrad, most glorious, and the other, who was born of Queen Hayatalnefous, Asad, most happy. The story of the princes Amgrad and Asad. The two princes were brought up with great care, and, when old enough, had the same governor, and the same master for the arts and sciences which King Camaralzaman would have them learn, and they had the same master for each exercise. The friendship which, from their infancy they entered into, occasioned an uniformity of manners and inclinations which increased with their years. When they were of age to keep a separate court, they loved one another so tenderly, that they begged King Camaralzaman to let them live together. He consented to it, and they had the same officers, the same domestics, the same lodging, and the same table. King Camaralzaman had so good an opinion of their capacity and justice, that he made no scruple of admitting them into his council at 18 years old, and letting them by turns preside there, while he took the diversion of hunting, or recreated himself with his queens at his houses of pleasure. The two princes being equally handsome, both in infancy and when they were grown up, the two queens loved them with incredible tenderness, in such a manner, however, that the Princess Badora had a greater kindness for Prince Asad, Queen Hayatalnefous's son, than her own, and Queen Hayatalnefous loved Amgrad, Princess Badora's son, better than her own son Asad. The two queens thought at first that this inclination was nothing but a friendship that proceeded from an excess of their own for each other, which they still preserved, but as the two princes advanced in years, that friendship turned to a secret love when the graces that appeared in their youth blinded their reason. They knew the criminality of their passion, and did all they could to resist it, but their efforts proved vain. They were accustomed to be familiar with them, to admire, to praise, to kiss and caress them from their infancy, and could not desist. when they grew up, which inflamed their desires to such a height that they could neither eat, drink, nor sleep. It was therein the prince's ill fortune, that the latter, being used to be so treated by them, had not the least suspicion of their infamous desires. The two queens had not discovered the secret of their passion, nor had either the boldness to mention the prince she loved, by word of mouth, or the guilty flame with which she burnt. They at last resolved to do it by billet, and made use of King Camaralzaman's absence to execute their wicked design, when he was gone a-hunting, which would take him up 3 or 4 days. Prince Amgrad presided at the council table the day of King Camaralzaman's departure, and heard causes till 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. When he returned to the palace from the council chamber, an eunuch took him aside, and gave him a billet from Queen Hayatelnefous. Amgrad took it but read with horror. "Traitor," said he to the eunuch, as soon as he had read it through, "is this the fidelity thou owest thy master and thy king?" At these words he drew his saber, and cut off his head. Having done this, he ran in haste to the Princess Badoura his mother, bearing his resentment still in his looks, and showing her the billet, told her the contents of it, and from whom it came, but, instead of hearkening to him, she fell into a passion, and said, "Son, it is all a calumny and impostor. Queen Hayatelnefous is a very discreet princess, and you are very bold to talk after this rate." The prince was enraged at his mother, to hear her speak so of him. "You are both bad alike," said he, "and had it not been for the respect I owe my father, this day should have been the last of Hayatelnefous's life." Queen Badoura might have imagined, by the example of her son Amgrad, that Prince Assad, who was as virtuous as the other, would not be pleased with such a declaration of love as had been made to his brother, yet that did not hinder her persisting in so abominable a design. She wrote him a billet the next day, which she trusted with an old woman belonging to the palace to convey to him. The old woman watched her opportunity to give it as he was coming from the council chamber, where he presided that day. In his turn, the prince took it, and, reading it, fell into such a fury that, without finishing it, he drew his saber, and punished the old woman as she deserved. He ran presently to the apartment of his mother Queen Hayatelnefous with the billet in his hand. He would have shown it to her, but she did not give him time, crying out, "I know what you would have, you are as impertinent as your brother Amgrad. Begone, and never come into my presence again." Assad stood as one thunderstruck at these words, of which he could not comprehend the meaning. When he recollected himself, he was so transported with rage, that he had like to have given very fatal demonstrations of his anger, but he contained himself, and withdrew without making any reply, fearing, if he stayed, he might say something unworthy the greatness of his soul. Amgrad had put the same constraint on himself, and, guessing by his mother's carriage that she was altogether as criminal as Queen Hayatelnefous, went to his brother, to chide him for not communicating that hated secret to him, and to mingle his sorrow with Assad's. The two queens grew desperate when they found so much virtue in the two princes, and, instead of reforming themselves, renounced all sentiments of mothers and of nature, and conspired together to destroy them. They made their women believe the two princes had attempted to ravish them, they counterfeited the matter to the life by tears, cries, and curses, and lay in the same bed, as if the resistance they had made had wasted them so much, that they were almost at death's door. When Camaralzaman returned to the palace from hunting, he was very much surprised to find them in bed together in tears, and the part of desponding ladies was acted so well, that he was touched with compassion, and asked them, with earnestness, what had happened to them. At this question, the dissembling queens wept and groaned more bitterly than before, and, after pressing them again and again to tell him, Queen Badoura at last answered thus: Sir, our grief is so extraordinary, and so just, that we ought not to see the light of the sun nor live a day, after the violence that has been offered us by the princes your sons. Their brutality is such that they entered into a horrid design in your absence, and had the boldness and insolence to make attempts upon our honor. Your Majesty will excuse us from saying more, you may guess the rest. By our affliction, the king sent for the two princes, and would have killed them both with his own hand, if old King Armanos, his father-in-law, who was present, had not held his arm. Son, said he, what are you going to do? Will you stain your hands and your palace with your own blood? There are other ways of punishing, if they are really guilty. He endeavored thus to appease him, and desired him to examine the matter, and see whether they did indeed commit the crime of which they were accused. It was now a hard thing for Camaralzaman to be so much master of himself as not to butcher his own children. He ordered them to be put under arrest, and sent for an emir called Gendar, whom he commanded to carry them out of the city, and put them to death, as far off and in what place he pleased, but not to return unless he brought their clothes back. As a token of having executed his orders, Gendar traveled with them all night, and early the next morning alighted, telling them, with tears in his eyes, the cruel commands he had received. Believe me, princes, said he, it is next to death to obey your father, who chose me to execute what he ordered concerning you. Would to heaven I could avoid it. The princes replied, do your duty, we know well you are not the cause of our deaths, and pardon you freely. Then they embraced, and bid each other adieu with so much tenderness, that it was a long time before they could leave one another's arms. Prince Assad was the first who prepared himself for the fatal stroke. Begin with me, Gendar, said he, that I may not have the affliction to see my clear brother Amgrad die. Amgrad opposed him in this, and Gendar could not, without weeping more than before, be witness of this dispute between them, which showed how perfect and sincere their friendship was. They at last determined the contest by desiring Gendar to tie them together, and put them in the most convenient posture to kill them at one blow. Do not refuse two unfortunate brothers the poor comfort of dying together, said the generous princes, for all things, even our innocence, are common between us. Gendar agreed to it, and, as they desired, tied them to each ether, breast to breast, close, and when he had placed them so as he thought he might strike the blow with the more surety to answer their request, and cut off their heads at once, he asked if they had anything to command him before they died. We have only one thing to desire, replied the princes, which is to assure our father, on your return, that we are innocent, but Do not charge him with our deaths, knowing he is not well informed of the truth of the crime of which we are accused." Jendar promised to do what they would have him, and drew his saber. His horse, being tied to a tree just by, started at the sight of the saber, which glittered against the sun, broke his bridle, and ran away with all speed into the country. Jendar set a great price upon him, being a very good horse, besides, being richly harnessed, the emir could not well bear the loss. This accident so troubled him, that, instead of beheading the two princes, he threw down his saber, and ran after his horse to catch him. The horse galloped on before him, and led him several miles out of his way into a wood. Jendar followed, and the horses' neighing roused a lion that was asleep not far off. The lion started up, and, instead of running after the horse, made directly towards Jendar, who thought no more of his horse, but how to avoid the lion, and save his life. He ran into the thickest of the wood, the lion pursuing him. Driven to this extremity, he said to himself, "Heaven had not punished me in this manner, but to show the innocence of the princes whom I was commanded to put to death, and now, to add to my misfortune, I have not my saber to defend myself." While Jendar was gone, the two princes were seized with a violent thirst, occasioned by the fear of death, notwithstanding their steadfast resolution to submit to the king their father's cruel order. Prince Amgrad showed his brother a fountain not far off. "Ah, brother," said Asad, "we have but a short time to live, and what need have we to quench our thirst? We can bear it a few minutes longer." Amgrad, taking no notice of his brother's remonstrance, unbound himself, and his brother likewise, whether he would or not. They went to the fountain, and, having refreshed themselves, heard the roaring of a lion, who, in pursuit of his prey, had got to the end of the wood near where the princes were. They also heard Jendar's dreadful cries, on which Amgrad seized Jendar's saber, which lay on the ground, saying to Asad, "Come, brother, let us go and help poor Jendar, perhaps we may arrive soon enough to deliver him from the danger in which he now is." The two princes ran to the wood, and entered it just as the lion was going to fall upon Jendar. The beast, seeing Prince Amgrad advancing towards him with a saber in his hand, left his prey and came against him with fury. The prince met him intrepidly and gave him a blow so forcibly and dexterously, that it felled him to the ground. When Jendar saw that the two princes were the men who saved his life, he threw himself at their feet, and thanked them for the great obligation he had to them, in words which sufficiently showed his gratitude. "Princes," said he, rising up and kissing their hands, with tears in his eyes, "God forbid that ever I should attempt anything against your lives, especially after having so humanely and bravely saved mine. It shall never be said that the Emir Jendar was guilty of such ingratitude. The service we have done," answered the princes, "ought not to hinder you from executing the orders you have received. Let us catch your horse, and then return to the place where you left us." They were at no great trouble to take the horse, whose mettle was come down a little with running. When they had restored him to Jendar, and were near the fountain, they begged and argued with him to do as their father had commanded, but all to no purpose. "I only take the liberty to desire you," said Jendar, "and I pray you not to deny me, that you will divide my clothes between you, and give me yours, and go so far, that the king your father may never hear of you more. The princes were forced to comply. Each of them gave him his clothes, and covered themselves with what he could spare of his. He also gave them all the gold he had, and took his leave of them. When Amir Jendar parted from the princes, he passed through the wood where Amgrad had killed the lion, in whose blood he dipped their clothes, which having done, he proceeded on his way to the capital city of the Isle of Abene. On his arrival, King Camaralzaman asked him if he had done what he ordered. Jendar replied, "See, sir, the faithful witnesses of my obedience," giving him, at the same time, the clothes of the princes. How did they take the punishment I commanded to be executed on them? Jendar answered, with wonderful constancy, "Sir, and a holy resignation to the decrees of heaven, which showed how sincerely they professed their religion. But, particularly, they behaved themselves with great respect towards your majesty, and an entire submission to the sentence of death. We die innocent," said they. "However, we do not murmur, we take our death as from the hand of heaven, and forgive our father, for we know very well he has not been rightly informed of the truth." Camaralzaman was sensibly touched at Amir Jendar's relation, and, putting his hand into Prince Amgrad's pocket, he found an open billet. He no sooner knew that Queen Hayatelnefous wrote it, as well by a lock of her hair which was in it, as by her handwriting, than he froze with horror. He then, trembling, put his hand into the pocket of Asad, and, finding there likewise Queen Badora's billet, his surprise was so great and so lively that he swooned away. Never did man grieve like Camaralzaman when he was recovered from swooning. "Barbarous father as thou art!" cried he, "what hast thou done? Thou hast murdered thy own children, thy innocent children. Did not their wisdom, their modesty, their obedience, their submission to thy will in all things, their virtue, did not these all plead in their behalf, blind and insensible father? Dost thou deserve to live after the execrable crime which thou hast committed? I have brought this abomination on my own head, and heaven chastises me for not persevering in the aversion to women, with which I was born. And, O ye detestable wives! I will not, as ye deserve, wash off the guilt of your sins with your blood. Ye are unworthy of my rage, but perdition seize me if ever I see you more." King Camaralzaman was a man of too much religion to break his vow. He commanded the two queens to be lodged in separate apartments that very day, where they were kept under strong guards, and never afterwards saw them. While the king of the Isle of Abene afflicted himself for the loss of the princes his sons, of which he thought he had been the author by too rashly condemning them, the royal youths wandered through deserts, endeavoring to avoid all places that were inhabited, and the sight of any human creature. They lived on herbs and wild fruits, and drank only stinking rainwater, which they found in the crevices of the rocks. They slept and watched by turns at night, for fear of wild beasts. When they had traveled about a month, they came to the foot of a high mountain inaccessible for its cragginess, the stones being black, and so rugged, that it was impossible to ascend over them to the summit of the hill. At last, they discovered a kind of path, but it was so narrow and difficult, they durst not venture up it. This obliged them to go along by the foot of the mountain, in hopes of finding a more easy way to reach the top. They went round it 5 days, but could see nothing like a path, so they were obliged to return to that which they had neglected. They still thought it would be in vain to attempt going up by it. They deliberated on what they should do for a long time, and at last, encouraging one another, resolved to ascend the hill. The more they advanced, they thought it was the higher and steeper, which made them think several times of giving up the enterprise. When one was weary, the other stopped, and both rested together. Sometimes they were both so tired, that they wanted strength to go further, then, despairing of being able to reach the top, they thought they must lie down, and die of fatigue and weariness. When they found they had recovered a little strength, they would animate each other, and go on. Notwithstanding all their endeavors and their courage, they could not get to the top that day. Night came on, and Prince Assad was so much fatigued, that he stopped, and said to Prince Amgrad, "I can go no further, I am ready to die." "Stay as long as you will," replied Prince Amgrad, "let us rest ourselves, and have a good heart. It is but a little way to the top, and the moon befriends us." They rested about half an hour, when Assad, having attained more strength, proceeded on their way to the mountain's summit, where they at last arrived, and lay down. Amgrad rose first, and, advancing, saw a tree at a little distance. He went to it, and found it was a pomegranate tree, with large fruit upon it, and a fountain near the foot. He ran to his brother Assad to tell him the good news, and conducted him to the tree which grew by the side of the fountain. They both refreshed themselves thereby, eating each a pomegranate, after which they fell asleep. Next morning, when they awoke, "Come, brother," said Amgrad to Assad, "let us go on, I see the mountain is easier to be traveled over on this side than the other, all our way now is downhill." But Assad was so fatigued with the last day's journey, that he wanted 3 or 4 days' repose to recruit his strength. They spent them, as they had done many before, in discoursing on their mother's inordinate desires, and deploring their misfortunes. "But," said they, "since heaven has so visibly declared itself in our favor, we ought to bear them with patience, and comfort ourselves with hopes that we shall soon see an end of them." At the end of 3 days' rest, the two brothers continued their travels, and were 5 days in descending the hill before they came into the valley. Then they discovered a great city, at which they were very joyful. "Brother," said Amgrad to Assad, "are not you of my opinion, which is, that you should stay in some place out of the city, where I may come to you again, while I go to learn the language, and inform myself of the name of the city, and in what country we are. And when I come back, I will bring provisions with me. It is not convenient for us to go there together, there may be danger in it, and so much notice will not be taken of one stranger as of two." "Brother," replied Assad, "I approve of what you say, it is prudent. But if one of us must part from the other on that account, I cannot suffer that it shall be you. Allow me to go, for what a trouble will it be to me if any ill accident should happen to you." "Ah! But, brother," answered Amgrad, "the same ill accident you fear for me, I am as much afraid of for you. Pray let me go, and do you stay here with patience, I will never yield to it," said Asad, if any ill should happen to me, it will be some comfort too. Think that you are safe. Amgrad was forced to submit, and Asad, going towards the city, stopped in a grove at the foot of the mountain. Prince Asad took the purse of money which Amgrad had in charge, and then proceeded towards the city. He had not gone far in the first street, before he met with a reverend old man with a cane. In his hand, he was neatly dressed, and the prince taking him for a man of note in the place, who would not put a trick upon him, accosted him thus, "Pray, my lord, which is the way to the market place?" The old man looked on Prince Asad, smiling. "Child," said he, "it is plain you are a stranger, or you would not have asked that question." "Yes, my lord, I am a stranger," replied Asad. The old man answered, "You are welcome then, our country will be honored by the presence of so handsome a young man as you are. Tell me what business you have at the market place." "My lord," replied Asad, "it is nearly 2 months since my brother and I left our own country, which is a great way from hence. We have not ceased traveling ever since, and we arrived here but today. My brother, fatigued with so long a journey, waits at the foot of the mountain, and for him and myself I am come to buy provisions." "Son," said the old man, "you could not have come in a better time. And I am glad of it, both for your and your brother's sake. I made a feast today for some friends of mine, and a great deal of victuals is left untouched. Come along with me, you may eat as much as you please, and, when that is done, I will give you enough to last your brother and you several days. Do not spend your money when there is no occasion, travelers are always in want of it. While you are eating, I will give you an account of our city, which nobody can do better than myself, who have borne all the honorable offices in it. It is well for you that you happened to meet with me, for, I must tell you, all our citizens cannot so well help and inform you as I can. I can assure you that some of them are wicked. Come along, you shall see the difference between a real honest man, as I am, and such as boast to be so, and are not." "I am infinitely obliged to you," replied Asad, "for your goodwill. I put myself entirely into your hands, and am ready to go with you wherever you please." The old man laughed in his sleeve to think that he had got the prince in his clutches. He walked by his side as close as he could, and, to preserve the favorable opinion which Asad had conceived of him, he kept talking all the way with great civility and politeness. Among other things, he said, "It must be confessed, it was your good fortune to meet with me, rather than with any other man, for which I thank God. When you come to my house, you will know the reason why I express so much satisfaction at meeting you." Arriving at the old man's house, he introduced Asad into a hall, where were 40 such old fellows as himself, who formed a circle round a flaming fire, which they adored. The prince was not more seized with horror at the sight of so many men adoring the creature for the Creator, than with the fear of finding himself betrayed, and in such an abominable place. While Asad stood motionless with surprise, the old cheat saluted the 40 gray-headed men round the fire, devout adorers of fire. Said he, "This is a happy day for us. Where is Gazban? Call him." He spoke these words so loud, that a Negro, who waited at the lower end of the hall, came immediately to him. This black was Ghazban, who, as soon as he saw the disconsolate Asad, imagined for what purpose he had been called, he therefore instantly seized him, and with amazing nimbleness tied him hand and foot. "When you have done," said the old man, "carry him down, and bid my daughters Bastava and Kavama give him every day the bastinado, and allow him only a little bread morning and evening for his subsistence, sufficient just to keep him alive till the next ship departs for the blue sea and the fiery mountain, when he shall be offered up an agreeable sacrifice to our divinity." As soon as the old man gave the cruel order, Ghazban bore Prince Asad into a cellar underneath the hall, from whence they proceeded through several dark rooms, till they came to a dungeon, the descent to which was by 20 steps, where he left him bound in chains of prodigious weight and bigness. Ghazban then went to give notice of it to the old man's daughters, but he might have spared himself the trouble, their father having before sent for them, and given instructions himself how they were to proceed. "Daughters," said he, "I have just now caused a young Mussulman to be secured in the dungeon, therefore, as you well know how to do it, go instantly and give him the bastinado, and as you cannot better show your zeal for our divinity, and the fire which you adore, than by your severity to him, do not be sparing in the punishment you are to inflict." Bastava and Kavama, who had been bred up in their hatred to Musulman, received this order with joy. They descended immediately into the dungeon, stripped Asad, and bastinadoed him so unmercifully, that the blood issued out of the wounds, and he was left almost dead. After this cruel execution, they put a piece of bread and a pot of water by him, and retired. It was some time before Asad recovered from the state of insensibility in which they had left him, and, in reflecting on his melancholy condition, he burst into a flood of tears, bitterly deploring the misery with which he was surrounded. The pleasing reflection, however, that this misfortune had not happened to his brother Amgrad, gave him some degree of comfort. Amidst his distress, Prince Amgrad waited for his brother till the evening with great impatience, but when it was 2, 3, and 4 of the clock in the morning, and Asad not returned, his sorrow was so very violent, that he grew almost desperate. He spent the night in that dismal condition, and, as soon as it was day, went to the city, which, on entering, he was surprised to see but very few Mussulman. He accosted the first he met, and asked him the name of the place, who told him it was the city of the magicians, so called because of the great number of magicians therein who adored fire, and that there were but very few Mussulman. Amgrad then demanded how far it was to the Isle of Abene. He was answered, that it was 4 months' voyage by sea, and a year's journey by land. The man, having satisfied the prince as to these 2 questions, hastily left him, and went about his business. Amgrad, who was about 6 weeks coming from the Isle of Abene with his brother Asad, could not comprehend how they came to this city in so short a time, unless the way across the mountain were much shortened, and not frequented because of the difficulty of the pass. Proceeding further through the town, he stopped at a tailor's shop, whom he knew to be a Mussulman by his habit, as he had likewise known the man with whom he had just before conversed. Having saluted him, he sat down, and told him the occasion of troubling him. When Prince Amgrad had done speaking, the tailor replied, "If your brother has fallen into the hands of some magician, depend upon it you will never more see him, he is irrecoverably lost. Comfort yourself, therefore, as well as you can, and beware of falling into the same misfortune, to avoid which, I would advise you to stay for some time at my house, and I will acquaint you with all the tricks of these magicians, that, when you go from hence, you may take the more care of yourself by being guarded against them." Amgrad, impressed with the deepest concern for the loss of his brother, accepted the tailor's offer, and returned him 1,000 thanks for his kindness. The story of Prince Amgrad, and a lady of the city of the magicians. Prince Amgrad went not out of the tailor's house for a whole month, without his host accompanying him. At last, however, he ventured to go to the baths. Returning home through a street in which there was nobody but himself and a lady, he was surprised at her approaching him unveiled. The lady, seeing a handsome young man just come out of the bath, asked him, with a smiling air, whither he was going, casting, at the same time, such amorous glances, that Amgrad could not possibly resist her charms. "Madam," said he, "I am going to my own house or yours, as you please." "My lord," replied the lady, with an agreeable smile, "ladies of my quality never take men to their own houses, they always go to the men's." At this unexpected answer of the lady, Amgrad was very much confounded. He durst not venture to take her home to his landlords, fearing that he would be so highly displeased with him as to withdraw his protection, of which, considering he was in a place where he must always be upon his guard, he stood in too much need. Quite unacquainted with the city, he knew not where to carry her, and yet was unwilling to lose so happy an opportunity. In this uncertainty he resolved to leave it to chance, and therefore, without returning an answer, he went forwards, the lady following him. Amgrad led her through so many streets, lanes, and alleys, that both grew weary with walking. At last, however, they came into a street, having a great gate at the end of it, which, being shut, prevented their going further. The gate, which had a seat on each side of it, belonged to a house fronting the street. Amgrad sat himself down on one seat to take breath, and the lady, being also much fatigued, seated herself on the other. She then inquired of the prince, whether the house belonged to him. "Yes, madam," said Amgrad. "Why, then, do not you enter?" replied the lady. "Whom do you wait for?" "Fair lady," answered the prince, "I have not got the key of the gate, I left it with my slave, who, being sent on an errand, is not yet returned. Besides, having been ordered to provide something good for dinner, I am afraid we shall be under the disagreeable necessity of waiting a long time for him." The prince met with so many difficulties in satisfying her passion, that he began to repent of having undertaken it. He therefore contrived this answer, in hopes that the lady, out of resentment, would have left him, and gone in pursuit of another lover, but he was mistaken. "Your slave is an impertinent fellow," said Madame, "to stay so long. When he comes back, I will chastise him myself as he deserves, if you refuse to do it. It is by no means decent to sit here alone with a man to whom I am an entire stranger." She then rose, and, taking up a stone, began to force open the lock of the gate. which being only made of wood, after the country manner, was very weak. Amgrad did all he could to hinder her. "What are you doing, madam?" said the prince. "For heaven's sake, stay a little." "What are you afraid of?" replied the lady. "Is it not your house? The breaking of the lock will be no great damage, a new one can be purchased at a trifling expense." She accordingly broke it open, and entered the house. Amgrad, when he saw the door forced open, gave himself up as a lost man. He reflected whether it would be more advisable to go into the house, or to retreat as fast as he could, to avoid the danger which he believed inevitable, and was just going to have recourse to the latter, when the lady returned. Seeing that he did not enter, "Why do not you come into your house?" said she. "Fearing we have nothing ready," answered the prince, "I am looking to see if my slave is coming." "Come in," said madam, "it will be more prudent to wait within doors than without." Amgrad, though with great reluctance, followed her into the house. After passing through a spacious court, which had been newly paved, they ascended by several steps into piazzas, which led to a large, open, and well-furnished hall, where he and the lady saw a table ready spread with all sorts of delicate dishes, a sideboard heaped with fruit, and a cistern full of bottles of wine. When Amgrad saw everything in such order, he doubted not that he was undone, the quality of the owner appearing by the richness of the feast. "Poor Amgrad," said he to himself, "thou wilt soon follow thy dear brother Asad." The lady, on the contrary, being transported at the sight, cried out, "How, my lord, did you fear there was nothing ready? Your slaves, you see, have done more than you expected. But, if I am not mistaken, these preparations were made for some other lady, and not for me. No matter, let her come, I promise you I will not be jealous, I only beg the favor of being permitted to wait on her and you." Amgrad, though much concerned at this accident, could not help laughing at the lady's pleasantry. "Madam," said he, thinking of something else besides what perplexed him, "there is nothing in what you fancy, this is my common dinner, and no extraordinary preparations, I assure you." He could not prevail on himself to sit at a table which was not prepared for him, he therefore took his seat on a sofa, footnote, a Turkish bench on which mats and cushions are put, but the lady still kept teasing him with her importunities. "Come, sir," said she, "you must certainly be hungry. After bathing, let us eat and enjoy ourselves." Amgrad, complying at last with her request, sat down to table. The lady, having eaten a bit, took a bottle and glass, and poured out some wine, then, having drunk to Amgrad, filled another and presented it to him, who pledged her. The more the prince reflected on this adventure, the more he was anosed that the master of the house did not appear, and that a house so elegant and well furnished should be left without a servant. "It will be lucky," said he to himself, "if the man of the house does not come till I am got clear of this intrigue." While he was indulging this and some other troublesome thoughts, the lady ate and drank heartily, obliging him to do the same, and they were almost come to the last course when the master of the house arrived. It happened to be Bahadur, master of the horse to the king of the magicians, to whom this house belonged, but generally residing in another, he seldom visited it, unless to regale himself with 2 or 3 chosen friends. On such occasions he always sent provisions from his other house by some of his servants, who were just gone as the lady and Amgrad entered. Bahadur, as usual, came in disguise, and without attendants, a little while before the time appointed for his friend's coming, and was not a little surprised to see the door of his house broken open. He entered without making a noise, but hearing some persons talking and making merry in the hall, he crept along by the side of the wall, and put his head halfway within the door, to see who they were. Perceiving a young gentleman and a young lady eating, at his table, the victuals which he had provided for his friends and himself, and that there was no great harm done, he resolved to make a jest of it. The lady, who sat with her back towards the Dewey, did not see the master of the horse, but Amgrad, who had the glass in his hand, and was just going to drink, observed him immediately. His countenance instantly changed at the sight of Bahadur, who made a sign not to say a word, but to come and speak with him. Amgrad drank and rose. "Where are you going?" said the lady. The prince answered, "Pray, madam, stay here a little, I shall return in a minute, a small affair obliges me to go out at present." Bahadur waited for him in the piazza, and led him into the court to talk to him without being heard by the lady. When Bahadur and Prince Amgrad were in the court, Bahadur demanded of the prince, how the lady came into his house, and why they broke open his door. "My lord," replied Amgrad, "you may very reasonably think me guilty of a very unwarrantable action, but if you will have patience to hear me, I hope my innocence will appear." He then told Bahadur, in few words, what had happened, without disguising any part of the truth, and, to convince him that he was not capable of being so criminal as he might think, he declared himself a prince, and related the reason of his coming to the city of the magicians. Bahadur, who naturally loved strangers, was transported with an opportunity of obliging one of Amgrad's rank and quality, for by his air, his actions, his handsome discourse, and his noble look, he did not in the least doubt the truth of what he had said. "Prince," said Bahadur, "I am very glad I can oblige you in so pleasant an adventure as this, and, so far from disturbing the feast, it will be a pleasure to me to contribute to your satisfaction in anything. My name is Bahadur, I am master of the horse to the king of the magicians. I commonly dwell in another house, which I have in the city, but come here sometimes to have the more liberty with my friends, for I cannot be so free at home among my children and domestics. As you have made this lady believe that you have a slave, I will support your assertion by personating the character, and, to spare your excuses, I repeat that it shall positively be so. You will presently know my reason for it. Go to your place, and continue to divert yourself. When I return, and come before you in a slave's habit, chide me for staying so long. Do not be afraid even to strike me. I will wait upon you all the while you are at table till night. You shall sleep here, and so shall the lady, and tomorrow morning you may send her home with honor. I shall afterwards endeavor to do you more important services. Go, and lose no time." Amgrad would have made an excuse, but the master of the horse would not let him, forcing him to go to the lady. He had scarcely entered the hall before Bahadur's friends arrived. Bahadur called them to him, and apologized his not entertaining them that day, telling them they would approve of the reason when they knew it, which should be in due time. When they were gone, he also went forth, and dressed himself in a slave's habit. Prince Amgrad approached the lady in a much better humor than when he left her, on finding that the house belonged to a man of quality, who had received him so courteously. As he sat down to table again, he said, "Madam, I beg 1,000 pardons for my rudeness. I was vexed that my slave should tarry so long. The rascal shall pay for it when he comes. I will teach him to use me so another time. Let not that trouble you," said the lady. "If he is guilty of any faults, let him pay for it. Do not think of him, we can enjoy ourselves without him, I warrant." Amgrad continued at the table with the more pleasure, being under no apprehensions at the consequence of the lady's indiscretion, who ought not to have broken open the door, had it even been Amgrad's own house. They drank and laughed, and drank again, till Bahadur arrived. Disguised as a slave, Bahadur entered like one who feared his master's displeasure for staying out when he had company with him. He fell down at his feet, and kissed the ground, to implore his clemency, and, when he had done, stood behind him with his hands across, in expectation of his commands. "Sirrah," said Amgrad, with a fierce tone and a fiery look, "is there such a slave as thou in all the world? Where have you been? What have you been doing, that you came no sooner?" "My lord," replied Bahadur, "I ask your pardon, I was endeavoring to do as you ordered me, and could not dispatch it sooner. Besides, I did not think you would come home so early." "You are a rascal," said Amgrad, "and I shall bang your sides for you, to teach you to lie, and to fail me another time." He then rose up, took a stick, and gave him 2 or 3 blows, but so slightly, that he hardly felt it, after which he sat down to table again. The lady, not satisfied with the chastisement Amgrad had bestowed on him, also rose, took the stick, and struck Bahadur so unmercifully, that the tears came into his eyes. Amgrad, offended at such freedom, and knowing that the pretended slave was not a proper object of resentment, cried out, "It is enough," but she continued her rude discipline, regardless of the prince's intercession. "Let me alone with him," said she, "I will punish him severely, and I warrant that he will be more expeditious in future." But, repeating her blows, Amgrad rose from the table, and forced the stick out of her hand, which, however, she did not give up without some difficulty. When she found that she could beat Bahadur no longer, she sat down, and railed at and cursed him. Bahadur wiped his eyes, and stood behind his fictitious master to fill out wine. When he saw they had done eating and drinking, he took away the cloth, and put everything in its place, and, night coming on, lighted up the lamps. As often as he passed the lady, she muttered and threatened him, and gave him abusive language, to Amgrad's great disliking, who would have hindered her, if he could. When it was time to retire, Bahadur prepared a bed for them, and withdrew into a chamber over against that where they were to lie, and laid himself down, and soon fell asleep. Having been fatigued with his beating, Amgrad and the lady entertained one another a good half-hour afterwards, but the lady, wanting to go forth before she went to bed, passed through the gallery that parted Bahadur's chamber from theirs, and hearing him snore, and seeing a saber hanging up by him, she turned back again, and said to Prince Amgrad, "Pray, my lord, as you love me, do me one favor." "In what can I serve you?" replied the prince. The lady answered, "Oblige me so far as to take down your saber, and cut off your slave's head." Amgrad was astonished at such a proposal from a lady, and doubted not it was the wine she had drunk that instigated her. "Madam," said he, "let my slave alone, he is not worthy of your notice. I have beaten him, and you have beaten him, it is sufficient, I am very well satisfied with him. He is seldom guilty of such faults." "That shall not do," replied the lady in a violent fury, "the rogue shall die, if not by your hands, by mine." Saying this, she ran and took down the saber from the place where it hung, drew it out of the scabbard, and was going to execute her wicked design. Amgrad, to prevent her, took the saber out of her hand, saying, "You shall be satisfied, madam, the slave shall die, since you will have it so, but I shall be sorry that any one but myself should kill him." When she had given him the saber, "Come, follow me," said he, "make no noise, lest we wake him." They went into the chamber, where Amgrad, instead of gratifying the lady's desire, struck at her with the weapon, and severing her head with the blow, it fell upon Bahadur. Had not the noise of the blow which Amgrad gave the lady, in cutting off her head, wakened Bahadur, her head falling upon him would have done it, he was amazed to see Amgrad with a saber covered with blood, and the body of the lady lying headless on the ground. The prince told him what had passed, and, ending his discourse, said, "I had no other way to hinder her from killing you, she was so transported with fury against you." "My lord," replied Bahadur, full of gratitude, "persons of your rank, and so generous as you, are not capable of doing so wicked an action as she desired of you. You are my deliverer, and I cannot enough thank you." After embracing him, in order to show him what sense he had of his obligations, he said, "We must carry this corpse out before it is quite day. Leave it to me, I will do it." Amgrad would not agree to that, saying that he would carry it away himself, since he had done the deed. Bahadur replied, "You are a stranger in this city, and will not come off so well as one who is acquainted here. I must do it, if for no other reason than both our safeties, to prevent our being questioned for her death. Stay you here, and if I do not come back before day, you may be sure the watch has taken me, and, for fear of the worst, I will by a writing give you this house and furniture for your habitation while you stay in this city." When he had written, signed, and delivered the paper to Prince Amgrad, he put the lady's body and head in a bag, took it on his shoulder, and went out with it from one street to another, taking the way to the seaside, but he had not gone far before he was met by one of the judges of the city, going the rounds in person, as was usual for the chief magistrates to do there. Bahadur was stopped by the judge's followers, who, opening the bag, found the body of a murdered lady, bundled up with the head. The judge, who knew the master of the horse notwithstanding his disguise, took him home to his house, and, not daring to put him to death without telling the king, because of his quality, he conveyed him to court as soon as it was day. As soon as the king had heard from the judge what a foul action the master of the horse had been guilty of, as appeared by the circumstances of the matter. He upbraided him in these words, Is it thus, then, that you rob and murder my subjects, and then would throw their dead bodies into the sea to hide your villainy? Let us rid the world of such a monster, go hang him up immediately. Innocent as Behader was, he received his sentence of death with perfect resignation, and said not a word to justify himself. The judge escorted him to his house, and, while the gallows was preparing, sent a crier to publish throughout the city, that at noon the master of the horse was to be hanged for committing a murder. Prince Amgrad, who had in vain expected Behader's return, was in a terrible consternation when he heard the crier publish the approaching execution of the master of the horse. If, said he to himself, somebody must die for the death of such a wicked woman. It is I, and not Behader. I will never let an innocent man be punished for the guilty, and, without deliberating any more, hastened to the place of execution, whither the people were running from all parts. When Amgrad saw the judge bringing Behader to the gibbet, he went up to him, and said, I am come to tell you, and to assure you, that the master of the horse, whom you are leading to execution, is wholly innocent of the lady's death. I am guilty of the crime. If it is one to have killed the most detestable of women, who would have murdered Behader? So he told him the affair as it had happened. The prince having informed the judge how he met her coming out of the bath, how she was the cause of going into the master of the horse's house of pleasure, and what had passed till the moment in which he was forced to cut off her head to save Behader's life. The judge ordered the execution to be stopped, and conducted Amgrad to the king, taking the master of the horse with them. The king had a mind to hear the story from Amgrad himself, and the prince, the better to prove his own and the master of the horse's innocence, embraced that opportunity to discover his quality, with all the accidents that had befallen him and his brother Asad, before and after their departure from the capital city of the Isle of Ehin to that time. The prince having done speaking, the king said, I rejoice that I have by this means come to the knowledge of you. I not only give you your own and my master of the horse's life, whom I commend for his civility to you, but I restore him to his office, and as for you, prince, I declare you my grand vizier, to make amends for your father's unjust usage of you, though it is also excusable, and I permit you to employ all the authority I now give you to find out Prince Asad. Prince Amgrad, having thanked the king of the city and country of magicians for the honor he had done him, and taken possession of his office of Grand Vizier, ordered the common crier to promise a great reward to any one who should bring forth Prince Asad, or tell any tidings of him. He sent men up and down the country to the same purpose, but, notwithstanding all his and their diligence, they could hear nothing. The sequel of the story of Prince Asad. Asad, in the meanwhile, continued in the dungeon in chains. Bastava and Kavama, the cunning old conjurer's daughters, treating him daily with the same cruelty and inhumanity as at first. The solemn festival of the adorers of fire approached, and a ship was fitted out for the fiery mountain as usual. The captain's name was Bayram, a great bigot to that religion. He loaded it with proper merchandise, and, when it was ready to sail, he put Asad in a chest, half full of goods, a few crevices being left opened to admit air sufficient to keep him alive. The chest was stowed in the bottom of the hold for greater security. Before the ship sailed, the Grand Vizier Amgrad, Asad's brother, who had been told that the adorers of fire usually sacrificed a Mussulman every year on the fiery mountain, suspecting that Asad might unhappily have fallen into their hands, and designed as a victim at that bloody sacrifice, resolved to search the ship in person. He ordered all the passengers and seamen to be brought upon deck, and commanded his men to search every part of the ship, which they did, and yet Asad could not be found, being too artfully concealed. When the Grand Vizier had done searching the vessel, she sailed. And as soon as Bayram was got out to sea, he ordered Prince Asad to be taken out of the chest and fettered, to prevent him from throwing himself into the sea, since he knew he was going to be sacrificed. The wind was favorable for 2 or 3 days, after which it proved contrary, and there arose a furious storm, which drove the vessel so far out of her course, that neither Bayram nor his pilot knew where they were. They were afraid that the ship would be dashed against the rocks, for they discovered land and a dreadful shore before them. Bayram saw that he was driven into the port and capital of Queen Margiana, which was a great mortification to him. Queen Margiana was a very devout professor of the Mohammedan religion, and a mortal enemy to the adorers of fire. She banished all of them out of her dominions, and would not let any of their ships touch at her ports. The tempest increasing, Bayram was forced to put into the port of the Queen's capital city, or his ship would be dashed in pieces against the rocks that lay off the shore. In this extremity he held a council with his pilot and seamen. "My lads," said he, "you see to what a necessity we are reduced. We must choose one of two things: either resolve to be swallowed up by the waves, or put into Queen Margiana's port, whose hatred to all persons of our religion you know well. She will certainly seize our vessel, and put us to death without mercy. I see but one likely way to escape her, which is, to take the fetters off the Mussulman we have on board, and dress him like a slave. When Queen Margiana commands me to come before her, and asks what trade I use, I will tell her that I deal in slaves, that I have sold all except one, whom I keep to be my clerk, because he can read and write. She will no doubt desire to see him, and being handsome, and of her own religion, will have pity on him. She will certainly then ask to buy him, and I refusing, will not let us stay in the port till the weather is fair. If I sell him, perhaps she will give us leave to tarry, and let us be well used. If any of you have anything else to propose that may be more advantageous, I am ready to hearken to it." The pilot and seamen applauded his judgment, and agreed to follow his advice. Bayram commanded Prince Asad's chains to be taken off, and dressed him like a slave very neatly, as became one who was to pass for his clerk before the queen of the country. They had scarcely time to fit everything for their purpose, before the ship drove into the port, and then dropped anchor. Queen Margiana's palace was so near the seaside, that her garden extended down to the shore. She saw the ship sail by, and sent to the captain to come to her as soon as he had moored his vessel. She was walking in her garden, and gave him to understand that she waited for him. Bayram, who knew he would be sent for, landed with Prince Asad. whom he required to confirm what he had said of his being a slave, and his clerk. So he went to the palace garden, and was introduced to the queen. He threw himself at her feet, and informed her of the necessity he was under of putting into her port, that he dealt in slaves, and had sold them all except one, who was Asad there present, whom he kept for his clerk. The queen conceived an esteem for Asad as soon as she saw him, and was extremely glad to hear that he was a slave, resolving to buy him on any terms. She asked Asad what was his name. "Great Queen," replied Asad, with tears in his eyes, "does your Majesty ask what my name was formerly, or what it is now?" The Queen answered, "Have you two names then?" "It is but too true," said Asad, "I was once called Asad, the most happy, and now my name is Motor, devoted to be sacrificed." As his condition of a slave obliged him to use mysterious answers, Margiana did not understand his meaning. She perceived, however, that he had a great deal of wit. "Since you are clerk to the captain," said she, "no doubt you can write well, let me see your writing." Bayram had furnished Asad with pen, ink, and paper, as a token of his office, that the queen might take him for what he designed she should. The prince stepped a little aside, and wrote as follows, suitable to his miserable circumstances. "The blind man avoids the ditch into which the clear-sighted falls. Fools advance themselves to honors by discourses which signify nothing, while men of sense and eloquence live in poverty and contempt. The Mussulman, with all his riches, is miserable. The infidel triumphs, and we cannot hope things will be otherwise. The Almighty has decreed it should be so, and His will is not to be altered." Asad presented the paper to Queen Margiana, who admired alike the sententiousness of the thoughts, and the goodness of the writing. She needed no more to have her heart set on fire, and to feel a sincere concern for his misfortunes. She had no sooner read it than she addressed herself to Bayram, saying, "Do which you will either sell me this slave, or make a present of him to me. Perhaps it will turn most to your account to do the latter." Bayram answered insolently, that he could neither give nor sell him, that he wanted his slave, and would keep him. Queen Margiana, provoked at his boldness, would not talk to him about it any more. She took the prince by the arm, and turned him before her into the palace, sending Bayram word, that if he stayed a night in her port, she would confiscate his goods, and burn his ship. So he was forced to go back to his vessel, and prepare to put to sea again, notwithstanding the tempest was not yet subsided. Queen Margiana commanded supper to be got ready, and, while it was providing, she ordered Asad to be brought into her apartment, where she bade him sit down. Asad would have excused himself. "It does not belong to a slave," said he, "to presume to this honor." "To a slave," replied the queen, "you shall not be so long. Henceforward you are no more a slave. Sit down near me, and tell the story of your life, for, by what you wrote, and the insolence of that slave merchant, I guess there is something extraordinary in it." Prince Asad obeyed her, and, sitting down, began thus, "Mighty Queen, your Majesty is not mistaken in thinking there is something extraordinary in the story of my life. It is indeed more so than you can imagine. The ills, the incredible torments I have suffered, and the death to which I was devoted, and from which I am delivered by your generosity, will show, when I have related them, that my obligation to you is infinite. But, before I enter into the particulars of my miseries, which will strike horror into the hearts of all who hear them related, to explain the occasion of them, I must trace the matter a little higher, and begin with the source of my misfortunes. This preamble increased Queen Margiana's curiosity. The prince then told her of his royal birth, of his brother Amgrad, and their mutual friendship, of their mother's criminal passion, which in a night turned into inveterate hatred, the cause of all their sufferings, of the king's rage, how miraculously they saved their lives, how he lost his brother, how he had been imprisoned, tortured, and was only sent there to be sacrificed on the fiery mountain. When Asad had finished his discourse, the queen was more than ever enraged at the adorers of fire. Prince, said she, though I have always had an aversion to the adorers of fire, yet hitherto I have preserved some humanity for them, but, after their barbarous usage, and execrable design of sacrificing you, I will henceforth declare perpetual war against them. She would have said more, but supper being served up, hindered her. She made Prince Asad sit at table with her, being charmed with his beauty and eloquence, and touched with a most ardent passion, which she hoped soon to let him know. Prince, said she, we must make you amends for so many fasts and wretched meals, which the pitiless adorers of fire forced you to make. You will want to be nourished after such sufferings. With these and such like words supper began, and the queen plied the prince with wine to recover his spirits, of which he drank more than he could well bear. The cloth being taken away, Asad, wishing to go out, watched his time when the queen did not see him. He descended into a court, and, seeing the garden door open, went in. Being tempted by the pleasantness of the place, he walked there a while. At last he came to a fountain, where he washed his face and hands to refresh himself, and, lying down on some grass plots which surrounded the fountain, fell asleep. It was almost night, and Bayram, fearing the queen would do as she threatened, had weighed anchor, and was under sail, mightily troubled at the loss of Asad, by which he was disappointed of a most acceptable sacrifice. He comforted himself as well as he could with the thoughts that the storm was over, and that a land breeze favored his getting off from that coast. He was towed out of the port, and, as he was hoisting more sail to hasten his course, he remembered he wanted some fresh water. My lads, said he to the seamen, we must put to shore again, and fill our water casks. The sailors excused themselves, for they did not know where to get water. Bayram had observed, while he was talking to the queen in the garden, that there was a fountain at the end of it, near the port. Go, said he, to such a place of the palace garden. The wall is not above breast high, you may easily get over. There is a fountain, where you may fill all your barrels, and hand them on board without difficulty. The sailors accordingly went on shore to the place he directed. Them, leapt over the wall, filled their barrels, and easily enough heaved them over also, when they returned to their boat. As they were filling the casks, they perceived a man sleeping on the grass, and knew him to be Asad. They immediately divided themselves, and, while some of the crew filled their barrels, others surrounded Asad, and observed him, lest he should awake and offer to run away. As soon as they had filled their casks, they handed them over the wall to others of their crew, who waited there to carry them on board. They afterwards seized Asad, and bore him away asleep as he was. They got over the wall into their boat, and rowed to the ship. When they came near her, they cried out, "Captain, sound your trumpets, beat your drums, we bring your slave again." Bayram, who could not imagine how the seamen could find and take him again, and did not see Asad in the boat, it being night, waited their coming on board with impatience, to ask what they meant by their shouts, but seeing it was true, and that they had really got him, he could not contain himself for joy. He commanded him to be chained again, not staying to inquire how. They came at him, and having hauled the boat on board, set sail for the fiery mountain. In the meanwhile Queen Margiana was in a dreadful fright. She did not much concern herself at first when she found Prince Asad was gone out, because she did not doubt that he would soon return. When several minutes, and then an hour, were passed without hearing anything, she began to be uneasy, and commanded her women to look for him. They searched all about without finding him, and, night coming, she ordered them to search again with torches, which they did, but to as little purpose. Queen Margiana was so impatient and frightened, that she went with lights all over the garden to seek him herself, and passing by the fountain, saw a slipper, which she took up, and knew to be Prince Asad's. Her women also said that it was his, and the water being spilled about the cistern in which the fountain played, made her suspect that Bayram had again carried him off. She sent immediately to see if he was still in the port, and hearing that he had set sail a little before it was dark, and had stopped some time off the shore, while he sent his boat for water from the fountain, she doubted no longer of the prince's ill fortune. So she commanded the commodore of 10 men of war, who lay ready in the port to sail as occasion required, to prepare to put to sea, for that she would embark herself next morning as soon as it was day. The Commodore ordered the captains and subalterns, seamen and soldiers, on board, and was ready to sail. At the time appointed, she embarked, as she had said, and, when the squadron was at sea, told the Commodore her intention. "Make all the sail you can," said she, "and give chase to the merchantman that sailed yesterday out of this port. I give it to you to be plundered, if you take it, if not, your life shall answer it." The 10 ships chased Bayram's 2 entire days, and could not come near her, but on the 3rd day they got up with her, and encompassed her so that she could not escape. As soon as cruel Bayram saw the 10 men of war, he did not doubt but it was Queen Margiana's squadron in pursuit of him, and upon that ordered Asad to be bastinadoed, which he did every day, and had not once mistreating him go barbarously since he left the port of the city of the magicians. On sight of these ships, he treated him more cruelly than before. He was very much puzzled what to do when he found he was encompassed. To keep Asad was to declare himself guilty, to kill him was as dangerous, for he feared some token of it might be seen. He therefore commanded him to be unfettered, and brought from the bottom of the hold where he lay. When he came before him, "It is thou," said he, "who art the cause of my being pursued," and upon that he flung him in the sea. Prince Asad, knowing how to swim, got safe to shore. The first thing he did, after landing, was to thank heaven, who had delivered him from so great a danger, and once more rescued him out of the hands of the adorers of fire. He then stripped himself, and wringing the water out of his clothes, he spread them on a rock, where, by the heat of the sun and the rock together, they soon dried, after which, he lay down to rest. Deploring his miserable condition, not knowing in what country he was, nor where to turn himself, he refreshed himself as well as he could with wild fruits and fair water, and then went on his way, keeping as near the seaside as he could. At last he came to a sort of path, which he followed, and traveled 10 days through a country not inhabited, still living on herbs, plants, and fruits. On the 11th he approached near a city, which he knew to be that of the magicians, where he had been so ill-used, and where his brother Amgrad was Grand Vizier. He was very glad of it, resolving not to come near anyone of the adorers of fire, but only to converse with Mussulman, for he remembered having seen some the first time he entered the town. It being late, and seeing the shops were already shut, and few people in the streets, he resolved to stay in a churchyard near the city, where several tombs were built in the form of mausoleums. Finding the door of one open, he entered it, with an intention to pass the night there. We must now return to Bahram's ship, which was soon surrounded on all sides by Queen Margiana's squadron, after throwing Prince Assad overboard. Queen Margiana's ship, in which she was in person, first boarded, and Bahram, being in no condition of defense against so many, lowered his sails as a token of yielding. The Queen herself came on board him, and demanded where the clerk was whom he had the boldness to take away from her out of her very palace. Bahram replied, "Zero Queen, I swear before your Majesty, that he is not in my ship, you will, by searching it, see my innocence." Margiana ordered the ship to be searched as narrowly as possible. But she could not find the man whom she so passionately longed to recover, as well out of love to him, as out of that generosity which was her distinguishing character. She was going to kill Bahram with her own hand, which she, however, did not, contenting herself with seizing his ship and cargo, and turning him and his men on shore. Bahram and his seamen arrived at the city of the magicians the same night that Assad did, and stopped at the same churchyard. The city gates being shut, intending to stay in some tomb till next day, when they were opened again. As Assad's ill luck would have it, Bahram lighted upon that inn which the prince was sleeping, with his head wrapped up in his coat. Assad awoke at the noise he made, and asked, "Who's there?" Bahram knew him again presently. "Ha, ha," said he, "thou art the man who hast been my ruin forever. Thou hast escaped being sacrificed this year, but, depend upon it, thou shalt not escape the next." Saying this, he flew upon him, clapped his handkerchief in his mouth, to prevent his making noise, and by the help of his seamen bound him. Next morning, as soon as the city gates were open, Bahram and his men easily carried Assad to the old man's house where he had been so inhumanly treated. It was so early that they met nobody in the streets, and when he came to the old man's house, he was again thrown into the dungeon. Bahram acquainted the wizard with the sad occasion of his return, and the ill success of his voyage. The old rascal, upon this, commanded his two furies, Bastava and Kavama, to treat him, if possible, more cruelly than before. Asad was in a terrible surprise to find himself in the hands of his old persecutors, from whom he had suffered so much, and hoped that he had been delivered. He lamented the rigor of his destiny, and trembled when he saw Bastava enter with a cudgel, a loaf, and a pitcher of water. He was almost dead at the sight of that unmerciful wretch, and the thoughts of the daily sufferings he was to endure for another year, when he was to die the most horrible of deaths. Bastava dealt not so inhumanly by Prince Asad as she had done. The first time of his confinement, his cries, complaints, and most earnest prayers to her to spare him, joined with his tears, were so moving, that she could not help being melted by them, and to weep as bitterly as himself. "My lord," said she, covering his shoulders, which were always bare while he was under the bastinado, "I ask 1,000 pardons for my inhuman treatment of you formerly, and for what you feel at this time. Till now I was afraid of disobeying a father who is unjustly enraged against you, and resolved on your destruction, but at last I loathe and abhor this barbarity. Be comforted, your bad days are over. I will endeavor to make amends for all my crimes, of the enormity of which, by my future behavior, you will find I am convinced. You have hitherto looked upon me as an infidel, but having been converted by a slave who is a Mussulman, you must henceforth believe me one of your own religion. I hope your lessons will finish my conversion. To show my good intentions, I first beg pardon of heaven for my sins in using you so cruelly, and I trust that it will soon be in my power to set you entirely at liberty." The prince was transported to hear her talk at this rate. He thanked the Almighty for the change wrought upon her, and for touching the heart of so barbarous a creature. He also thanked her for her good disposition towards him, and omitted no arguments which he thought would have any effect to confirm her in her new religion. As a proof of the confidence he reposed in her, he gave her an account of his high birth, together with a relation of all his adventures to that period. When he began to believe she was in earnest, he asked how she could hinder her sister Kavama's treating him so barbarously as she used to do. "Let not that trouble you," replied Bastava, "I know how to order matters so that she shall never come near you." According to promise, she every day prevented Kavama going down to the dungeon, where she often visited the prince, and, instead of carrying bread and water, she brought him the best wine, and the choicest victuals she could get, which were provided by her Mohammedan slave. She often ate and drank with him herself, and did her utmost to render his confinement as easy as possible. A few days after, as Bastava was standing at her father's door, she heard the common crier making proclamation, but was at too great a distance to hear distinctly what it was. Having finished his harangue, he came nearer to repeat it again, when she drew back, and, as she stood holding the door half open, perceived the crier marching before the Grand Vizier Amgrad, brother to Asad, who was accompanied by several officers, with attendants walking before and behind him. The crier, going a few steps from the house, repeated the proclamation with a loud voice as follows: "The most excellent and illustrious Lord the Grand Vizier is come in person to seek for his dear brother, from whom he was separated about a year ago. He is young and handsomely made. If Any person has him in keeping, or knows where he is, his Excellency commands that they bring him forth, or give notice where he shall find him, promising a great reward to the person who shall do so. If any one conceal him, and be found out, his Excellency declares that he or they shall be punished with death, together with his or their children, and all who belong to the family, and his or their house or houses razed to the ground. Bostava had no sooner heard this, than she instantly shut the door, and ran as fast as she could to the dungeon to inform Assad of it. Prince, said she with joy, your troubles are at an end. Follow me, come immediately, and be free. She having taken off his fetters several days before, the prince followed her into the street, where, quite transported with what she had done, she cried, There! There! The Grand Vizier, who was not far from the house, hearing her clamors, returned. Assad, knowing him to be his brother, ran to him, and embraced him, which Amgrad, who presently found it to be his brother Assad, returned with all possible tenderness, and making him mount one of his officers' horses, who alighted for that purpose, conducted him to the palace, where he presented him to the king, by whom he was advanced to the post of a vizier. Bostava would not return to her father's house, which was next day razed to the ground, but kept Prince Assad in sight, and she, for the friendly part she had acted towards him, was admitted into the queen's service. The old man her father, and Bayram, were brought before the king, who condemned them and all their families to be beheaded. They threw themselves at his feet, and implored his mercy. There is no mercy to expect, said the king, unless you renounce your adoring of fire, and profess the Mohammedan religion. They accepted the conditions, and were pardoned at the intercession of Assad, in consideration of Bostava's friendship, for whose sake Kavama's life, and the lives of the rest of their families, were saved. Amgrad, to reward Bayram for turning Mussulman, and recompense him for his losses, made him one of his officers, and lodged him in his house. Bayram, being informed of Amgrad and his brother Assad's stories, proposed to his benefactor to fit him a vessel to convey them to their father King Camaralzaman's court, for, said he, the king must certainly have heard of your innocence, and impatiently desire to see you ere this, otherwise we can easily inform ourselves of the truth before we land, and if he is still in the same mind, you can return hither. The two brothers, liking the proposal, communicated it to the king of the city of the magicians, who approved of it, and commanded a ship to be equipped for that purpose. Bayram undertook the employment cheerfully, and, being master of the art of navigation and maritime affairs, he soon got in readiness to sail. The two princes, when they understood that the ship was ready, waited upon the king one morning to take their leave of him. While they were reciprocally passing compliments on the occasion, they were interrupted by a great noise and tumult in the city, and presently an officer came to give them notice that a numerous army was advancing against the city, nobody knowing who they were, or from whence they came. The king being mightily alarmed at the news, Amgrad addressed himself thus to him, Sir, though I am come to resign into your Majesty's hands the dignity of your first minister, with which you were pleased to honor me, I am, however, ready to do you all the service that lies in my power. I desire, therefore, that you would be pleased to let me go and see who this enemy is that comes to attack you in your capital city, without having first declared war. The king praying him to do so, Amgrad, with a very small retinue, parted from him immediately, to see what enemy approached, and to know the reason of their coming. It was not long before Prince Amgrad descried the army, which, approaching nearer and nearer, the foremost received him favorably, and conducted him to their princess, who stopped herself, and commanded the army to halt, while she discoursed with the prince, who, bowing profoundly to her, demanded if she came as a friend or an enemy, if as an enemy, what cause of complaint she had against the king his master. I come as a friend, replied the princess, and have nothing to complain against the king of the city of the magicians. His territories and mine are so situate that it is almost impossible for our subjects to quarrel with one another, or we ourselves to have any dispute. I only come to require a slave named Asad to be delivered up to me. He was carried away by one Bayram, a captain of a ship, the most insolent man in the world. I hope your king will do me justice, especially when he knows that I am Queen Margiana. The prince answered, Mighty queen, the slave you take so much pains to seek is my brother. I lost him, and have found him again. Come, madam, I will deliver him up to you myself, and will do myself the honor to tell you the rest of the story as we go to the king my master's palace, who will rejoice to see you. The queen ordered her army to pitch their tents, and encamp where they were. She then accompanied Prince Amgrad to the city and palace royal, where he presented her to the king, who received her as became his dignity and hers. Asad, who was present, and knew her as soon as he saw her, also paid his duty to her, and she, at sight of him, showed all the marks of transporting joy. While thus busied, news came that an army, more powerful than the former, was approaching on another side of the city. The king of the magicians, understanding that the second army was more numerous than the first, was frightened to a greater degree than before, for the dust they made raised clouds in the air, which almost obscured the face of heaven. Amgrad, cried he, what shall we do? A new army comes to destroy us. Amgrad, guessing what the king would have of him, instantly mounted his horse again, and galloped towards the second army. He demanded of the advanced guards to speak with their general. They conducted him to their king, for such he perceived him to be by the crown he had on his head. When he drew near, he threw himself on the ground, and asked what he would have with the king his master. The monarch replied, I am Gyaor, king of China. My desire to learn some tidings of a daughter whose name is Badora, whom I married to Camaralzaman, you of Shahzaman, king of the Isles of the children of Khaladan, obliged me to leave my dominions. I suffered that prince to go to see his father King Shahzaman, on condition that he came back in a year with my daughter, but have impatiently waited ever since without hearing anything of them. Your king will lay an infinite obligation on an afflicted father by telling him if he knows what has become of them. Prince Amgrad, perceiving by his discourse that the king was his grandfather, kissed his hand with tenderness, and answered him thus, I hope your majesty will pardon my freedom, when you know that I take it only to pay my duty to my grandfather. I am the son of Camaralzaman, king of the Isle of Abene, and of Queen Badora, for whom you are thus troubled, and I doubt not that they are both in good health in their kingdom. The king of China, overjoyed to see his grandson, embraced him with extraordinary affection. Such a meeting, so happy and unexpected, drew tears from both. The king inquiring on what occasion he came into a strange country, the prince told him all that had happened to him and his brother Assad. When he had ended his relation, "My son," replied the king of China, "it is not just that such innocent princes as you should be longer ill-used. Comfort yourself, I will carry you and your brother home, and make your peace. Return, and acquaint your brother with my arrival." While the king of China encamped in the place where Prince Amgrad met him, that prince returned to let the king of the magicians, who waited for him impatiently, know how he had succeeded. The king was amazed that so mighty a monarch as the king of China should undertake such a long and troublesome journey from a desire to see his daughter, and, seeing that he was so near his capital, he gave orders to make things ready for his reception, and went forth to meet him. While these things were transacting, a great dust was seen from another quarter of the town, and suddenly news came of the arrival of a third army, which obliged the king to stop, and to desire Prince Amgrad once more to go and see who they were, and on what account they came. Amgrad accordingly went, accompanied by Prince Assad. They found it was Camaralzaman, their father's army, with which he was coming to seek for them. He was so grieved for the loss of his sons that Emir Jendar at last declared how he had saved their lives, and towards what country the two princes had traveled. The sad father embraced both with tears of joy, which put an end to those he had a long time shed for grief. The princes no sooner told him that the king of China, his father-in-law, was arrived than he detached himself from the grand army, and with a small party, among whom were his own sons, rode to wait upon him in his camp. They had not gone far before they saw a fourth army advancing, which seemed to come from the Persian side. Camaralzaman bade the two princes go and see what army it was, and in the meanwhile he would stay for them. They departed immediately, and, coming up to it, were presented to the king, of whom, after saluting him with due reverence, they demanded on what design he approached so near the king of the magicians' capital. The Grand Vizier, who was present, answered, in the name of the king his master, the monarch to whom you speak is Shahzaman, king of the Isles of the Children of Khaladan. He has a long time traveled, thus attended, to seek his son Prince Camaralzaman, who left his dominions many years ago. If you know anything of him, you cannot oblige him more than to acquaint him with it. The princes only replied, that they would bring him an answer in a little time, and, galloping back as fast as they could, told Camaralzaman that it was King Shahzaman's army, and that his father was with it in person. Wonder, surprise, joy, and grief, at having left the king his father without taking leave of him, had such an effect on King Camaralzaman, that he fell into a swoon as soon as he heard that he was so near. Prince Amgrad and Prince Assad used every possible means to recover him, which having at last effected, he hastened to his father's tent, and threw himself at his feet. Never was there a more moving interview. Shahzaman gently complained of Camaralzaman's unkindness in so cruelly leaving him, and Camaralzaman discovered a heartfelt sorrow for the fault he had committed. The three kings and Queen Margiana stayed 3 days at the court of the king of the magicians, who treated them magnificently. These 3 days were rendered the more remarkable by Prince Asad's marriage with Queen Margiana, and Prince Amgrad's with Bastava, for the service she had done his brother Asad. At last, the three kings, and Queen Margiana, with Prince Asad her husband, went to their several kingdoms. As for Amgrad, the king of the magicians had such a love for him, that he would not part with him, but, being very old, resigned his crown to him. King Amgrad W. Ben he had the supreme authority, did his utmost to exterminate the worship of fire, and to establish the Mohammedan religion throughout all his territories. The story of Noureddin and the fair Persian Balsora was many years the capital of a kingdom tributary to the caliphs of Arabia. The king who governed it in the days of the Caliph Harun al-Rashid was named Zinchi. They were cousins, the sons of 2 brothers. Zinchi, not thinking it proper to commit the administration of his affairs to one vizier, made choice of 2, Khakan and Sawi. Khakan was of a sweet, generous, affable temper, and took a wonderful pride in obliging those with whom he had any concern, to the utmost of his power, without the least hindrance or prejudice to justice, whenever it was demanded of him, so that he was universally respected at court, in the city, and throughout the whole kingdom, and everybody's mouth was full of the praises he so highly deserved. Sawi was of a quite different character. He was always sullen and morose, and treated everyone in a disrespectful manner, without any regard to rank or quality. Instead of making himself beloved and admired for his riches, he was so perfect a miser that he denied himself the necessaries of life. In short, nobody could endure him, and if ever anything was said to him, it was something of ill. But what increased the hatred of the people against him the more, was his implacable aversion to Khakan, always interpreting in the worst sense the actions of that worthy minister, and endeavoring to do him all the ill offices imaginable with the king. One day, after council, the king of Balsora diverted himself with his 2 viziers, and some other members of the council. They fell into discourse about the women slaves, who with us are daily bought and sold, and are almost reckoned in the same rank with our wives. Some were of opinion, that it was sufficient the slave were beautiful and well-shaped, others maintained, and amongst the rest Khakan, that neither beauty, nor 1,000 other charming perfections of the body, were the only things to be coveted in a mistress, but that she ought to possess, with a great deal of wit, prudence, modesty, and amenity of manners. The king was entirely of their opinion who spoke last, and quickly gave a demonstration of it, by ordering Khakan to buy him a slave, one that was a perfect beauty, mistress of those qualifications they had just mentioned, and especially very witty. Sawi, jealous of the honor the king had done Khakan, and vexed at his being of a contrary opinion, said, "Sir, it will be very difficult to find a slave so accomplished as to answer your Majesty's demand, and should they light upon such a one, as I scarcely believe they will, she will be a bargain at 10,000 pieces of gold." "Sawi," replied the king, "I perceive plainly you think it too great a sum. It may be so for you, though not for me. Then turning to the chief treasurer, he ordered him to send the 10,000 pieces of gold to the vizier's house. Khacan, as soon as he came home, sent for all the courtiers who dealt in women slaves, and strictly charged them, that if they met with a slave who answered the description he gave, they should acquaint him. The courtiers, partly to oblige the vizier, and partly for their own interest, promised to use their utmost endeavors to find one to his liking. Accordingly, seldom a day passed but they brought him one, yet he always found some fault or other with her. One day, as Khacan was getting on horseback, early in the morning, to go to court, a courtier came to him, and, with a great deal of eagerness, catching hold of the stirrup, told him there was a Persian merchant arrived very late the day before, who had a slave to sell, so surprisingly beautiful, that she excelled all women that his eyes had ever beheld, and, as for parts and learning, added he, the merchant engages she shall cope with the finest wits and the most knowing persons of the age. Khacan, overjoyed at this news, which made him hope for a favorable reception at court, ordered him to bring the slave to the palace against his coming back, and so pursued his journey. The courtier did not fail to be at the vizier's at the appointed hour, and Khacan, finding the lovely slave so much beyond his expectation, immediately gave her the name of the fair Persian. As he had an infinite deal of wit and learning, he soon perceived, by her conversation, that it was in vain to search any further for a slave that surpassed her in any of those qualifications required by the king, and therefore he asked the courtier at what rate the Persian merchant valued her. Sir, replied the courtier, he is a man of few words in bargaining, and tells me that the very lowest price he seeks for her is 10,000 pieces of gold. He has also sworn to me that, without reckoning his pains and trouble from the time of his first taking care of her, he has laid out pretty nearly that sum upon her education, in masters to instruct and teach her, besides clothes and maintenance, and as he always thought her fit for a king, so from her infancy, in which he bought her, he has not been sparing in anything that might contribute towards advancing her to that high honor. She plays upon all sorts of instruments to perfection, she dances, sings, writes better than the most celebrated authors, understands poetry, and, in short, there are few books but what she has read, so that there never was a slave of so great capacity. The vizier Khacan, who understood the merit of the fair Persian better than the courtier, who only reported what he had heard from the merchant, was unwilling to put off the bargain till another time, and therefore he sent one of his servants to look after the merchant where the courtier told him he was to be found. As soon as the Persian merchant came, "It is not for myself, but for the king," said the vizier Khacan, "that I buy your slave. You must, however, let him have her at a more reasonable price than what you have already set upon her." "Sir," replied the merchant, "I should do myself an unspeakable honor in offering her as a present to His Majesty, were I able to make him one of so inestimable a value. I ask little more than what her education and maintenance have cost me, and all I have to say is, that I believe His Majesty will be greatly pleased with the purchase." The vizier Khacan would stand no longer bargaining with the merchant, but paid down the money immediately. "Sir," said he to The vizier, upon taking his leave, since the slave is designed for the king's use, give me leave to tell you, that being extremely fatigued with our long journey, you see her at a great disadvantage, and though, as to beauty, she has not her equal in the world, yet if you please to keep her at your own house a fortnight, and strive a little to please and humor her, she will appear quite another creature, after that you may present her to the king with abundance of honor and credit, for which, I doubt not, you will think yourself much obliged to me. The sun, you see, has a little tarnished her complexion, but, after 2 or 3 times bathing and dressing her according to the fashion of your country, she will appear to your eyes infinitely more charming than at present. Khacan was mightily pleased with the advice the merchant gave, and was resolved to follow it. Accordingly the fair Persian was lodged in a particular apartment near his lady, whom he desired to invite to an entertainment, and thenceforth to treat her as a mistress designed for the king. He also entreated his lady to get the richest clothes for her that could possibly be had, and especially those that became her best. Before he took his leave of the fair Persian, your happiness, madam, said he, cannot be greater than what I am about to procure for you, since it is for the king himself I have bought you, and I hope he will be better pleased with the enjoyment of you than I am in discharging the trust his majesty has laid upon me. However, I think it my duty to warn you of my son, who, though he has a tolerable share of wit, yet is a young, wanton, forward youth, and therefore have a care how you suffer him to come near you. The fair Persian thanked him for his good advice, and, on her giving him an assurance of her intention to follow it, he withdrew. End of volume 1st. End of the Project Gutenberg ebook, The Arabian Nights Entertainments Volume 1 This file should be named 5612.txt or 5612.zip. Project Gutenberg ebooks are often created from several printed editions, all of which are confirmed as public domain in the U.S. unless a copyright notice is included. Thus, we usually do not keep ebooks in compliance with any particular paper edition. We are now trying to release all our ebooks 1 year in advance of the official release dates, leaving time for better editing. Please be encouraged to tell us about any error or corrections, even years after the official publication date. Please note neither this listing nor its contents are final till midnight of the last day of the month of any such announcement. The official release date of all Project Gutenberg ebooks is at midnight, Central Time, of the last day of the stated month. A preliminary version may often be posted for suggestion, comment, and editing by those who wish to do so. Most people start at our websites at web links or web links. These websites include award-winning information about Project Gutenberg, including how to donate, how to help produce our new ebooks, and how to subscribe to our email newsletter, free. Those of you who want to download any ebook before announcement can get to them as follows, and just download by date. This is also a good way to get them instantly upon announcement, as the indexes our catalogers produce obviously take a while after an announcement goes out in the Project Gutenberg newsletter. Web links are ftp://pub/docs/books/gutenberg/etext04 or etext 03, 02, 01, 00, 99, 98, 97, 96, 95, 94, 93, 92, 92, 91 or 90. Just search by the first 5 letters of the filename you want. As it appears in our newsletters. Information about Project Gutenberg, 1 page. We produce about $2 million for each hour we work. The time it takes us, a rather conservative estimate, is 50 hours. To get any ebook selected, entered, proofread, edited, copyright searched and analyzed, the copyright letters written, etc. Our projected audience is 100 million readers. If the value per text is nominally estimated at $1, then we produce $2 million per hour in 2002 as we release over 100 new text files per month, 1,240 more ebooks in 2001 for a total of 4,000 plus. We are already on our way to trying for 2,000 more ebooks in 2002. If they reach just 1–2% of the world's population, then the total will reach over 500 billion ebooks given away by year's end. The goal of Project Gutenberg is to give away 1 trillion ebooks. This is 10,000 titles each to 100 million readers, which is only about 4% of the present number of computer users. Here is the briefest record of our progress, * means estimated. Ebooks year month. 1971 July. 1991 January. 1001994 January. 1001997 August. 1500198 October. 2001999 December. 2500200 December. 3002001 November. 4000200 October, November. 6000200 December * 9000200 November * 1000200 January *. The Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation has been created to secure a future for Project Gutenberg into the next millennium. We need your donations more than ever. As of February 2002, contributions are being solicited from people and organizations in Alabama, Alaska, Arkansas, Connecticut, Delaware, District of Columbia, Florida, Georgia, Hawaii, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Kansas, Kentucky, Louisiana, Maine, Massachusetts, Michigan, Mississippi, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, Nevada, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York, North Carolina, Ohio, Oklahoma, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, South Carolina, South Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, Vermont, Virginia, Washington, West Virginia, Wisconsin, and Wyoming. We have filed in all 50 states now, but these are the only ones that have responded. As the requirements for other states are met, additions to this list will be made and fund-raising will begin in the additional states. Please feel free to ask to check the status of your state. In answer to various questions we have received on this, we are constantly working on finishing the paperwork to legally request donations in all 50 states. If your state is not listed and you would like to know if we have added it since the list you have, just ask. While we cannot solicit donations from people in states where we are not yet registered, we know of no prohibition against accepting donations from donors in these states who approach us with an offer to donate. International donations are accepted, but we don't know anything about how to make them tax deductible, or even if they can be made deductible, and don't have the staff to handle it even if there are ways. Donations by check or money order may be sent to Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation, PMB 113, 1739 University AVE, Oxford, MS 38655-4109. Contact us if you want to arrange for a wire transfer or payment method other than by check or money order. The Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation has been approved by the U.S. Internal Revenue Service as a 501(c)(3) organization with IN. Employee Identification Number, 64-622154. Donations are tax-deductible to the maximum extent permitted by law. As fundraising requirements for other states are met, additions to this list will be made and fundraising will begin in the additional states. We need your donations more than ever. You can get up-to-date donation information online at web links. If you can't reach Project Gutenberg, you can always email directly to Michael S. Hart at pobox.com. Professor Hart will answer or forward your message. We would prefer to send you information by email. The legal small print 3 pages. Start the small print. For public domain ebooks start Why is this small print statement here? You know, lawyers. They tell us you might sue us if there is something wrong with your copy of this ebook, even if you got it for free from someone other than us, and even if what's wrong is not our fault. So, among other things, this small print statement disclaims most of our liability to you. It also tells you how you may distribute copies of this ebook if you want to. Before you use or read this ebook. By using or reading any part of this Project Gutenberg TM ebook, you indicate that you understand, agree to and accept this small print statement. If you do not, you can receive a refund of the money, if any, you paid for this ebook by sending a request within 30 days of receiving it to the person you got it from. If you received this ebook on a physical medium, such as a disc, you must return it with your request. About Project Gutenberg TM ebooks. This Project Gutenberg TM ebook, like most Project Gutenberg TM ebooks, is a public domain work distributed by Professor Michael S. Hart. Through the Project Gutenberg Association, the project. Among other things, this means that no one owns a United States copyright honor for this work, so the project, and you, can copy and distribute it in the United States without permission and without paying copyright royalties. Special rules, set forth below, apply if you wish to copy and distribute this ebook under the Project Gutenberg trademark. Please do not use the Project Gutenberg trademark to market any commercial products without permission. To create these ebooks, the project expends considerable efforts to identify, transcribe and proofread public domain works. Despite these efforts, the project's ebooks and any medium they may be on may contain defects. Among other things, defects may take the form of incomplete, inaccurate or corrupt data, transcription errors, a copyright or other intellectual property infringement, a defective or damaged disk or other ebook medium, a computer virus, or computer codes that damage or cannot be read by your equipment. Limited warranty, disclaimer of damages. But for the right of replacement or refund described below. 1. Michael Hart and the Foundation, and any other party you may receive this ebook from as a Project Gutenberg TM ebook disclaims all liability to you for damages, costs and expenses, including legal fees, and 2. You have no remedies for negligence or under strict liability, or for breach of warranty or contract, including but not limited to indirect, consequential, punitive, or incidental damages, even if you give notice of the possibility of such damages. If you discover a defect in this ebook within 90 days of receiving it, you can receive a refund of the money, if any, you paid for it by sending an explanatory note within that time to the person you received it from. If you received it on a physical medium, you must return it with your note, and such person may choose to alternatively give you a replacement copy. If you received it electronically, such person may choose to alternatively give you a second opportunity to receive it electronically. This ebook is otherwise provided to you, as is no other warranties of any kind, express or implied, are made to you as to the ebook or any medium it may be on, including but not limited to warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Some states do not allow disclaimers of implied warranties or the exclusion or limitation of consequential damages, so the above disclaimers and exclusions may not apply to you, and you may have other legal rights. Indemnity. You will indemnify and hold Michael Hart, the Foundation, and its trustees and agents, and any volunteers associated with the production and distribution of Project Gutenberg TM texts harmless, from all liability, cost and expense, including legal fees, that arise directly or indirectly from any of the following that you do or cause. 1. Distribution of this ebook. 2. Alteration, modification, or addition to the ebook. Or 3. Any defect. Distribution under Project Gutenberg TM. You may distribute copies of this ebook electronically, or by disc, book or any other medium if you either delete this small print and all other references to Project Gutenberg, or 1. Only give exact copies of it. Among other things, this requires that you do not remove, alter or modify the ebook or this small print statement. You may, however, if you wish, distribute this ebook in machine-readable, binary, compressed, markup, or proprietary form, including any form resulting from conversion by word processing or hypertext software, but only so long as either the ebook, when displayed, is clearly readable, and does not contain characters other than those intended by the author of the work, although and underscore characters may be used to convey punctuation intended by the author, and additional characters may be used to indicate hypertext links, or asterisk. The ebook may be readily converted by the reader at no expense into plain ASCII, EBCDIC or equivalent form by the program that displays the ebook, as is the case, for instance, with most word processors. OR asterisk, you provide, or agree to also provide on request at no additional cost, fee or expense, a copy of the ebook in its original plain ASCII form, or in EBCDIC, or other equivalent proprietary form. 2. Honor the ebook refund and replacement provisions of this small print statement. 3. Pay a trademark license fee to the foundation of 20% of the gross profits you derive, calculated using the method you already used to calculate your applicable taxes. If you don't derive profits, no royalty is due. Royalties are payable to Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation the 60 days following each date you prepare, or were legally required to prepare, your annual, or equivalent periodic, tax return. Please contact us beforehand to let us know your plans and to work out the details. What if you want to send money even if you don't have to? Project Gutenberg is dedicated to increasing the number of public domain and licensed works that can be freely distributed in machine-readable form. The project gratefully accepts contributions of money, time, public domain materials, or royalty-free copyright licenses. Money should be paid to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation. If you are interested in contributing scanning equipment or software or other items, please contact Michael Hart at hart@pobox.com. Portions of this ebook's header and trailer may be reprinted only when distributed free of all fees. Copyright C. 2001-2002 by Michael S. Hart. Project Gutenberg is a trademark and may not be used in any sales of Project Gutenberg ebooks or other materials, be they hardware or software or any other related product without express permission. End the small print. For public domain ebooks *vir 02/11/2 end.